The last rays of sunlight bled across the New Mexico sky, painting the craggy mesas in shades of crimson and gold. Mason Blackwood's weathered face, half hidden beneath the brim of his Stetson, bore the same colors as he tracked the hoofprints cutting through the desert floor. 20 years as a Texas Ranger had taught him to read the earth like other men read books, and this particular story spelled trouble. 3 horses, riding hard, weighed down with stolen goods. The Corrigan gang. He'd been hunting them for 2 weeks since finding the Anderson family butchered at their homestead. Father, mother, and 10-year-old boy with his throat cut while clutching a wooden toy horse Mason had carved for him on a previous visit. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder. Mason's hand moved instinctively to the colt at his hip. Too close. The ambush came sudden as a desert storm. Muzzle flashes from the ridge above. Bullets kicking up dust at his feet. Mason rolled behind a boulder, returning fire in one fluid motion. 3 shots, 3 hits. 2 bodies tumbled down the embankment like discarded dolls. But James Corrigan himself had positioned better. The outlaw's bullet found its mark, tearing through Mason's shoulder. As consciousness slipped away, Mason fired one last shot, satisfaction flickering across his face as he heard Corrigan's cry of pain before darkness claimed him. The scent of sage and wood smoke pulled Mason back to awareness. Pain radiated from his shoulder, and his hands were bound with rawhide thongs. Forcing his eyes open, he found himself in a small cave, the entrance framing a night sky ablaze with stars. A figure sat silhouetted against the dying firelight. "The famous Mason Blackwood," a woman's voice said, smooth as polished stone. "The gray wolf of the Rangers." She moved closer, firelight revealing high cheekbones and obsidian eyes that reflected nothing but contempt. Apache, mid-30s, with a single white feather woven into her midnight hair. A hunting knife rested comfortably in her hand. "You called my father Gray Wolf," she continued, "before you and your rangers slaughtered our people at Whispering Creek." Memory slammed into Mason like a physical blow. 3 years ago, the raid that had ended his career, the reason he'd surrendered his badge. "Your father was Nakoi," Mason said, his voice a dry rasp, "leader of the Ghost Band." "His name was Kitchi," she corrected sharply, "and he was no murderer of settlers, despite what your precious Alexander Payne told you." Mason studied her face, recognition dawning. "You're Elena." A flicker of surprise crossed her features before settling back into stone. "You remember the names of those you hunted?" "I remember the names of those I wronged," Mason replied, meeting her gaze without flinching. She pressed the knife to his throat, a tremor in her otherwise steady hand. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't finish what Corrigan started." "Because you already would have if that's what you wanted." Mason nodded toward his bandaged shoulder. "You patched me up instead." Elena withdrew the knife, moving back toward the fire. "I need something from you, Ranger. Then you can die with your ghosts." "I'm not a Ranger anymore. Your kind never stops being what they are." Mason tested his bonds, tight, expertly knotted. "What could you possibly want from me?" Elena reached into a leather pouch, withdrawing something that caught the firelight like a shard of the sun itself, a gold badge, bent and bloodied. "You were tracking the men who killed the family at Coyote Creek." "The Andersons," Mason corrected. "Their name was Anderson." "Names matter now?" She raised an eyebrow. "These same men attacked our hunting party last week. They took someone." Understanding dawned on Mason's face. "Your sister." Elena's mask slipped, revealing raw anguish before hardening again. "Anya, 16 summers, the last of my family." "Corrigan doesn't usually take captives," Mason said grimly. "He didn't take her for himself." Elena's voice dropped. "He was paid to deliver her to Silver Peak, to Alexander Payne." The name hit Mason like a second bullet. Alexander Payne, mining magnate, territorial commissioner, the man who'd provided the intelligence that led to the Whispering Creek massacre, the mission that had haunted Mason's dreams for 3 years. "Why would Payne want your sister?" Elena's fingers touched a worn leather pouch at her neck. "For what she knows. For what our family has protected for generations." She untied Mason's hands with swift, efficient movements. "I'm offering you a trade, Blackwood. Help me find my sister, and I'll give you Corrigan." He's still alive, but the wound you gave him won't let him travel far. Mason rubbed his wrists, considering her offer. And after, you'll still want your revenge for Whispering Creek. Elena's eyes held his. Justice and revenge aren't the same thing. Help me find Anya and I'll let justice decide what happens to you. The certainty in her voice told Mason everything he needed to know. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't telling the whole truth either. Whatever Payne wanted with her sister connected back to Whispering Creek somehow. I'll need my guns, Mason said finally. You'll get them when I decide I can trust you. Elena tossed him a canteen. We leave at first light. Corrigan's holed up in the old mission at Broken Cross. He's waiting for someone, probably Payne's men. Mason took a long swallow of water, studying Elena over the canteen's rim. You've been tracking me for days, waiting for me to lead you to Corrigan. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Like you said, Ranger, I'm good at hunting. But dawn painted the desert in shades of lavender and gold when they set out. Elena on a spotted mare, Mason on his dun gelding. They rode in silence, the rhythm of hoofbeats counting out the miles beneath a merciless sun. Mason's shoulder throbbed with each stride, but he kept pace without complaint. Payne was an old companion. Tell me about Whispering Creek, Elena said suddenly, her voice carrying on the still air. Tell me why you believed my father was a murderer. Mason squinted at the horizon, memories surfacing like stones in a riverbed. There were raids on 3 settlements, 19 dead, including women and children. All evidence pointed to the ghost band. Evidence provided by Payne, Elena countered, and others. A survivor from the Miller homestead identified a warrior with a wolf pelt and white feather. Your father's markings. Mason glanced sideways at her. But you don't believe it was him. My father hadn't left our camp in the weeks before your attack. He was dying of fever. Her voice remained steady, but her knuckles whitened around the reins. Someone wore his markings to frame him. Why would Payne want your people blamed? Elena's eyes met his, dark with certainty. For what lies beneath our land, the Sui Gen Bito, what your people might call the Soul Spring. Mason had heard whispers of the Soul Spring, an ancient source of water hidden in Apache territory, rumored to have healing properties. Most dismissed it as legend. Payne is a mining man. He wants gold, not water. In the desert, water is more precious than gold. Elena pointed toward distant mesas. The Soul Spring feeds underground rivers that reach for miles in all directions. Whoever controls it controls the future of this territory. Before Mason could respond, Elena reined sharply to a halt, raising one hand for silence. Her head tilted, listening. Mason followed her gaze to a ridge of red rock where heat shimmers danced against the sky. Riders, she whispered, coming fast. They veered off the trail, urging their mounts into a narrow ravine, as 6 horsemen thundered past on the ridge above. Payne's men, judging by their well-equipped appearance. Not random patrols either. They rode with purpose. They're heading to Broken Cross, Mason said grimly. Corrigan's rendezvous. Then we need to beat them there. Aleda's face hardened with determination. They pushed their horses harder, cutting across dry washes and scaling treacherous slopes to shave miles off their journey. By mid-afternoon, the crumbling adobe walls of Broken Cross Mission appeared on the horizon, shimmering in the heat like a mirage. Mason and Elena dismounted in a copse of stunted cottonwoods, tethering their horses before creeping closer on foot. The mission stood silent, seemingly abandoned, but Mason knew better. The stillness felt watchful, dangerous. 6 men rode in, he murmured, studying the ground, but only 5 horses in the corral. Elena nodded toward a blood trail leading to the mission door. Corrigan's inside, bleeding badly. Mason surveyed the building's blind spots and approaches. There's an old priest's entrance around back. Might be our best way in. Elena reached into her saddlebag, withdrawing Mason's Colt and rifle. Time to decide whose side you're on, Blackwood. He accepted the weapons, checking them with practiced hands. I'm on the side of truth, whatever that costs. The mission's back entrance led to a narrow vestibule thick with dust and cobwebs. They moved silently through shadow, the building's adobe walls muffling voices from the main chapel. Mason motioned Elena to wait as he edged forward to peer through a crack in the wooden door. James Corrigan sat slumped against the altar, face pale beneath his dark beard. Blood had soaked through the crude bandage on his thigh. 5 men surrounded him, Hard-faced professionals in dust-covered trail clothes, led by a tall figure in an immaculate black coat. Sebastian Reed, Payne's enforcer. "Mr. Payne is disappointed, Corsian." Reed's cultured voice carried the hint of a southern accent. "You were supposed to deliver the girl 3 days ago." Corrigan spat blood. "Blackwood complicated things. Bastard nearly killed me. Yet here you are, very much alive, while Blackwood is presumably dead." Reed's tone suggested this outcome displeased him. "And the Apache girl?" "My boys are bringing her. Should be here by nightfall." Corrigan grimaced in pain. "Now where's my money?" Reed glanced at his pocket watch. "Payment upon delivery was our arrangement." "I need a doctor," Corrigan growled. "That wasn't part of the arrangement." Reed sighed as if dealing with a particularly dim child. "Mr. Payne values results, not excuses. The girl and the map fragment, or no payment." Mason felt Elena stiffen beside him. Her hand closed around his arm, fingernails digging through his shirt. "My sister doesn't have what they want," she whispered. "I do." Before Mason could respond, the mission's front doors crashed open. Two riders entered, dragging a slight figure between them. A young Apache woman, her face bruised, her wrists bound with rope. "Anya," Elena breathed, the single word laden with anguish and relief. Mason gripped Elena's shoulder as she instinctively moved forward. "Wait," he urged. "We're outgunned." "She has the map fragment?" Reed demanded. One of the newcomers shook his head. "Searched her. Nothing." Reed turned back to Corrigan, drawing a silver-plated pistol. "You've wasted our time." "Wait," Corrigan raised his hands. "She knows where it is. She told my boys." Reed redirected his aim toward Anya. "Is this true, child?" The young woman lifted her chin defiantly, saying nothing. Her resemblance to Elena was striking, though her eyes held more fear than fire. "Perhaps you need motivation to speak." Reed nodded to one of his men, who drew a knife and approached Anya. Elena moved faster than Mason could stop her, bursting through the door with her rifle raised. "Touch her and die," she commanded, voice ringing through the chapel. Mason cursed under his breath, then stepped out behind her, his Colt trained on Reed. "Evening, gentlemen. Hope we're not interrupting." Reed's men reached for their weapons, freezing as Mason cocked his pistol. "I wouldn't," he advised. "Mason Blackwood," Reed smiled thinly. "Mr. Payne will be pleased to learn you survived." "Drop your guns," Mason ordered. "All of you." Reed studied them both, calculating the odds. 7 against 2? Poor wager, Ranger. Ex-Ranger, Mason corrected, and I've faced worse odds. "Not with a bullet hole in your shoulder." Reed's smile widened. "You're bleeding through your shirt, Blackwood. How steady is that aim?" The momentary distraction was enough. One of Reed's men lunged toward Anya with a knife. Elena fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The man dropped, clutching his chest. All hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted as Mason dove behind a wooden pew, pulling Elena down with him. Bullets splintered wood above their heads. Mason returned fire methodically, each shot finding its mark with Ranger precision. 2 more of Reed's men fell. Elena crawled toward her sister, knife drawn to cut Anya's bonds. A bullet grazed her arm, drawing blood. Mason provided covering fire, but Reed and his remaining men had taken positions behind stone pillars, making them difficult targets. "We need to move," Mason shouted over the gunfire. "Back door!" Elena cut through Anya's ropes and pulled her toward the vestibule. Mason backed up behind them, firing to keep Reed's men pinned down. As they reached the door, a stray bullet struck an oil lamp. Flames erupted, racing up the dry wooden beams. Smoke billowed through the chapel. Through the haze, Mason saw Reed dragging a protesting Corrigan toward a side exit. "Go," Mason urged Elena. "Get her out. I'll be right behind you." Elena hesitated briefly, then nodded, pulling her sister through the door. Mason fired his remaining rounds at Reed's position, then turned to follow. A bullet caught him in the side, the impact throwing him against the wall. Mason gritted his teeth against the white-hot pain, forcing himself through the door as flames engulfed the mission behind him. Outside, he staggered toward the cottonwood grove where Elena waited with the horses. Blood soaked his shirt, but determination kept him moving. They needed distance before Reed rallied his remaining men. "Mason!" Elena rushed to support him as he stumbled. "You're hit!" "Just a graze," he lied, pulling himself into the saddle through sheer willpower. Let's ride. They thundered away from the burning mission, Anya sharing Elena's mount. Only when the smoke faded to a distant smudge on the horizon did they slow, turning into a narrow canyon to make camp. As Mason slid from his saddle, his strength finally gave out. The last thing he saw was Elena's face above him, concern replacing her usual guardedness. Her lips moved, but he couldn't hear her words as darkness closed in. He awoke to the sensation of fire in his side. Elena leaned over him, her face tense with concentration as she pressed a poultice of herbs against his wound. Nearby, Anya watched with wary eyes. "Welcome back," Elena said softly. "I thought we'd lost you." Mason grimaced as she tightened a bandage around his torso. "Takes more than one bullet to kill a Texas Ranger." "Ex-Ranger," she reminded him, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. Night had fallen, their small fire casting long shadows against the canyon walls. Above them, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. Mason struggled to sit up, accepting the canteen Elena offered. "How's your sister?" he asked between sips. Elena glanced at Anya, who had fallen asleep wrapped in a blanket. "Exhausted, frightened, but stronger than she looks." "Reed will be hunting us," Mason warned. "We need to find somewhere safe." "Redemption is a half-day's ride," Elena suggested. "You have friends there?" "One, if he's still alive." Mason winced as he shifted position. "Samuel Burke, former ranger, now sheriff. We served together before." "Before Whispering Creek," Elena finished. Mason nodded grimly. "Burke never believed the Ghost Band was responsible for those raids. He might help us, if only to prove he was right." Elena studied him in the firelight, her expression unreadable. "Why did you help us today? You could have let Reed kill us both." Mason's weathered face creased in thought. 3 years ago, I led good men into Whispering Creek on bad intelligence. 43 Apache died because I didn't ask enough questions." His voice roughened with memory. "I've been living with those ghosts ever since." "Ghosts don't care about redemption," Elena said quietly. "No," Mason agreed, "but I do." The fire crackled between them, sparks rising toward the star-strewn sky. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, but for tonight, an uneasy truce held. Mason closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him towards sleep. Just before consciousness slipped away, he heard Elena whisper, "Thank you for saving her." He wasn't sure if he was meant to hear it, or if she knew he was still awake. Either way, it was the first genuine gratitude she'd shown since their paths crossed. It wasn't absolution, but it was a start. Dawn found them already riding, keeping to arroyos and canyons to hide their trail. Anya rode behind Elena, her arms wrapped around her sister's waist. The younger woman hadn't spoken since their escape from the mission, but her eyes watched Mason with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. "Your sister doesn't talk much," Mason observed. "Anya speaks when necessary," Elena replied. "Unlike most white men." Despite her sharp tone, the tension between them had eased somewhat. Shared danger created bonds that transcended old hatreds, though neither would acknowledge it aloud. "What did Reed mean about a map fragment?" Mason asked. Elena exchanged glances with her sister before answering. "Our grandfather was a medicine man who knew the secret paths to Soul Spring. Before he died, he divided his map into 2 pieces, believing it would be safer that way." She touched the leather pouch around her neck. "I carry 1 piece. Anya was supposed to guard the other." "But she doesn't have it," Mason concluded. "Our cousin Tarak holds it now," Elena explained. "He's hiding with what remains of our people in the shadow of Thunder Mountain." Mason absorbed this information, pieces falling into place. "So Payne captured your sister, thinking she had the second fragment." Elena nodded. "And when he discovers his mistake, he'll go after your cousin," Mason finished grimly. By mid-morning, the clustered buildings of Redemption appeared on the horizon, a rough mining town carved from desert and ambition. Unlike the boom towns Mason had seen come and go across the territory, Redemption had permanence to its structures. Alexander Payne's influence was evident in the solid brick bank and the grand hotel bearing his name. They skirted the town's edge, approaching from the north to avoid main streets and curious eyes. Mason led them to a modest house set apart from its neighbors, a small badge-shaped sign the only indication this was the sheriff's office. "Wait here," Mason instructed, dismounting stiffly. His wound protested every movement, but he hid his pain behind a stoic mask. He approached the door cautiously, hand near his holster. Before he could knock, the door swung open to reveal a man in his 50s with a silver-streaked beard and sheriff's badge. Samuel Burke's weathered face broke into surprise, then guarded pleasure. "Mason Blackwood," Burke drawled. "Heard you were dead." Not for lack of trying, Mason clasped the offered hand. Burke's sharp eyes noted the bloodstain on Mason's shirt, then moved past him to Elena and Anya waiting with the horses. "Bringing trouble to my doorstep, I see." "Trouble found me first," Mason replied. "We need help, Sam." Burke studied the Apache women, recognition dawning. "That's not Kohei's daughter, isn't it? The one they call Elena." "She prefers Elena," Mason confirmed. "Her sister's Anya. Payne's men were holding her captive. We liberated her." Burke sighed heavily. "You always did know how to make powerful enemies." He stepped back, opening the door wider. "Better come inside before someone sees you." The sheriff's house was Spartan but clean, with wanted posters covering one wall and a Winchester rifle hanging above the door. Burke gestured them toward a back room while he checked the street through shuttered windows. "Payne's got men watching the town," he explained, pulling curtains closed. "Ever since the new strike, security's doubled." "New strike?" Mason questioned. "Gold discovery near Silver Peak. At least, that's what Payne's telling everyone." Burke's tone suggested skepticism. "Whole town's abuzz. Land prices tripling overnight." Elena and Anya exchanged meaningful glances. "It's not gold," he found, Elena said quietly. Burke raised an eyebrow. "No. It's water," Mason explained, "an underground source called Soul Spring." Burke's expression shifted from skepticism to understanding. That would explain a lot. He moved to a cabinet, withdrawing a bottle of whiskey and 4 glasses. "Been watching Payne for months. Something didn't add up about his operations." "What do you mean?" Mason accepted the offered drink. "Mining activity's down, but he's hiring more men, shipping and drilling equipment instead of mining tools." Burke leaned against his desk. "Then there's the children." Elena's head snapped up. "What children?" Burke's face darkened. "Apache and Navajo children, mostly. Orphans being trained as servants, according to Payne's story. But I've seen them brought in at night, handled more like prisoners than orphans." Anya spoke for the first time, her voice soft but clear. "They take us to work the drill machines. Our hands are smaller. We can reach places men cannot." Mason's jaw tightened at the implication. Child labor was nothing new in mining operations, but this went beyond exploitation. "There's more," Anya continued, looking at her sister. "Payne believes our grandfather left a third piece of the map. He thinks father hid it before the massacre." Elena paled visibly. "That's not possible. There were only 2 pieces." "Payne doesn't think so," Anya insisted. "He's convinced the complete map shows more than just the path to Soul Spring. It shows how to access the underground rivers. All of them." The implications hung heavy in the room. Control of the territory's hidden water sources would give Payne unprecedented power in the desert lands. Burke refilled Mason's glass. "You've stepped into something bigger than a simple rescue, my friend." "Wouldn't be the first time," Mason replied dryly. "Question is, what do we do about it?" "First, we get you patched up properly," Burke decided. "Then we gather evidence. Payne's hosting an auction tonight at his hotel. Invitation only. Word is he's selling parcels of land around Silver Peak to investors." "Land that isn't his to sell," Elena added bitterly. "Never stopped the white man before," Burke acknowledged with surprising candor. "But if we can prove he's using false pretenses, swindling investors with promises of gold when it's water he's after, federal marshals might take notice," Mason finished. "It's a start," Burke agreed. "I've got an invitation. Benefit of being sheriff, even one Payne doesn't trust. I can get you in as my deputy." "What about us?" Elena demanded. Burke studied the sisters thoughtfully. "Kitchen staff always needs extra hands during these events. Most don't look twice at Indian women serving food." Anya's eyes flashed with indignation, but Elena placed a restraining hand on her arm. "We'll do it, whatever it takes to stop Payne." As Burke outlined their plan, Mason caught Elena's gaze across the room. Behind her determination, he glimpsed something else, a vulnerability she rarely showed. Tonight they would enter the lion's den, armed with little more than courage and righteous anger. It wouldn't be enough, Mason knew. Not against a man like Payne, with wealth and influence reaching to territorial capitals and beyond. But it was all they had. As twilight descended on redemption, Mason stood before a cracked mirror in Burke's spare room, adjusting a borrowed deputy's badge. His freshly bandaged wound throbbed beneath a clean shirt. In the reflection, he caught sight of Elena in the doorway, her traditional dress replaced by a simple kitchen maid's uniform. "You look different," he offered. "As do you," she replied, studying his formal attire. "Every warrior wears the appropriate disguise for battle." Mason turned to face her. "This isn't just about your sister anymore, is it? Or even your people's land?" Elena's dark eyes met his. "It never was." She withdrew the leather pouch from beneath her collar, opening it to reveal a weathered fragment of hide covered in strange markings. "This is bigger than both of us, Mason Blackwood. Tonight we face the man who destroyed both our lives for his greed." "And tomorrow?" Mason asked quietly. Elena's answer was interrupted by Burke's arrival. "Carriage is ready," the sheriff announced. "Time to attend Mr. Payne's little soiree." As they stepped into the gathering darkness, Mason couldn't shake the feeling they were walking into a trap. The real question wasn't whether Payne had set the trap, but whether they could turn it against him before it snapped shut. The Payne Grand Hotel stood like an alabaster monument to wealth amid redemption's dust and grime. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across the lobby, where New Mexico's elite mingled in finery that seemed transported from another world. Mason adjusted his deputy's badge, feeling the weight of his concealed Colt against his ribs as he followed Burke through the crowd. "Remember," Burke murmured, accepting 2 champagne flutes from a passing waiter. "We're just gathering information. Don't do anything to draw attention." Mason took the offered glass, his eyes methodically scanning the room. Exits, guards, potential threats. Old habits died hard. Payne doesn't know me by sight. Only Reed has seen me up close. And Reed? No sign of him yet. Mason's attention caught on a familiar face across the room. But our host has arrived. Alexander Payne cut an imposing figure even from a distance. Tall and broad-shouldered despite his 60 years, with a silver-streaked mane and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to command. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands and clapping shoulders like a politician on campaign. "Doesn't look like a man with blood on his hands," Burke observed. "Neither did Judas, I expect," Mason replied. They circulated carefully, Burke introducing Mason as a visiting deputy from Santa Fe. The wealthy ranchers and merchants barely glanced at him, more interested in Burke's insights about the rumored gold strike. Mason listened, gathering fragments of conversation like scattered puzzle pieces. "Payne says the vein runs deeper than anything in California. Already purchased 2 parcels myself. Getting in early is the key. Bringing in experts from Denver to maximize extraction." In the kitchen doorway, he glimpsed Elena and Anya moving efficiently among the staff, carrying trays and refilling glasses. Elena caught his eye briefly, giving an almost imperceptible nod toward a side hallway where 2 armed guards stood watch. "Something valuable behind that door," Mason murmured to Burke. "Payne's private office," Burke confirmed. "Maps and documents for tonight's auction, most likely." A bell chimed, drawing the guest's attention to a small stage where Payne now stood beside an easel draped with velvet cloth. "Friends, neighbors, distinguished investors," Payne's resonant voice commanded the room. "Thank you for joining me on this historic evening. For years, I believed our territory held untapped potential beyond what others could see." He gestured dramatically, and an assistant pulled away the velvet drape to reveal a large map of the region around Silver Peak. Red markings indicated various parcels of land. 3 weeks ago, my geologist confirmed what I've long suspected, a gold vein of unprecedented magnitude running through these marked territories. Payne smiled magnanimously. "Tonight, I'm offering you the opportunity to share in this discovery." Excited murmurs rippled through the crowd. Payne continued, detailing the parcels available for auction and their guaranteed return on investment. Mason noted how the most expensive properties aligned with the path Elena had described for the underground rivers leading from Soul Spring. "He's not selling gold mines," Mason whispered to Burke. "He's selling water rights disguised as mining claims." Burke nodded grimly. And when these investors discover there's no gold, Payne will already have their money and legal claim to the aquifer, Mason finished. As Payne concluded his presentation and the auction preparations began, Mason noted a commotion near the kitchen. Elena was arguing with a security guard who gripped her arm roughly. Mason started toward them, but Burke caught his sleeve. "Wait," the sheriff cautioned. "We can't blow our cover." Before Mason could respond, a new figure entered the ballroom. Sebastian Reed, impeccably dressed but with a fresh scar visible on his cheek. Mason tensed, instinctively angling his face away. "Reed's here," he muttered. "This just got complicated." Reed surveyed the room with predatory attention, his gaze lingering on the kitchen doorway where Elena had disappeared. Mason saw the moment recognition dawned on Reed's face, a subtle narrowing of eyes, a predator scenting prey. "He spotted Elena," Mason warned. Burke cursed under his breath. "We need a distraction." As Reed started toward the kitchen, Mason made his decision. "Keep an eye on Payne. I'm going after the girls." Before Burke could protest, Mason slipped through the crowd, circling to intercept Reed from the side. He bumped deliberately into the man, spilling champagne down Reed's immaculate jacket. "My apologies, sir," Mason drawled, keeping his head down as he dabbed at the spill with a handkerchief. "Clumsy of me." Reed pushed his hand away irritably. "Watch yourself," he snapped, then froze as recognition flashed in his eyes. "Blackwood?" Mason looked up, dropping the pretense. "Evening, Reed. Nasty scar you've got there." Reed's hand moved toward his concealed weapon, but Mason was faster, pressing the barrel of his Colt against Reed's ribs. "I wouldn't. Too many witnesses." "How are you alive?" Reed hissed. "Disappointed?" Mason guided him toward a quieter corner, gun still hidden between them. "I need you to take a message to your employer." "You're a dead man walking," Reed snarled. "Probably," Mason agreed, "but I won't go alone. Tell Payne I know about Soul Spring. I know what he did at Whispering Creek, and I have proof." It was a bluff, but Reed's momentary hesitation confirmed Mason's suspicions. "You have nothing," Reed said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Elena showed me the map fragment," Mason pressed, "and Burke's been building a case for months. Federal marshals are already on their way." This last lie struck home. Reed's eyes darted toward Payne, calculating. "Smart men know when to abandon a sinking ship," Mason suggested. Reed's expression hardened. "You think Payne doesn't have contingencies? He owns half the territory officials. Your evidence means nothing." "Maybe," Mason conceded, "but murder charges tend to get attention, even in territorial courts." He increased pressure with the gun. "Now you're going to walk out that door and tell Payne his secret's out, unless you'd prefer to take your chances with me right now." For a tense moment, Mason thought Reed would choose violence. Then the man's shoulders relaxed marginally. "This isn't over, Blackwood." "It never is," Mason agreed, lowering his weapon just enough to let Reed step away. Reed straightened his jacket with exaggerated dignity. "You've made a grave miscalculation," he warned, then turned and walked toward Payne, who was now surrounded by eager bidders. Mason watched long enough to see Reed whisper in Payne's ear, noting the flicker of alarm that crossed the magnate's face before his professional smile reasserted itself. Then Mason slipped toward the kitchen, searching for Elena and Anya. He found them cornered by two guards near the back exit, Anya clutching her sister's arm in fear. Elena's eyes blazed with defiance as one guard reached for her. "Problem here, gentlemen?" Mason called, hand resting on his visible badge. The guards turned, suspicious. "Kitchen staff only," the larger one growled. "Sheriff Burke sent me to fetch these two," Mason replied smoothly. "Seems there's been a complaint about missing silverware." Elena's expression remained carefully neutral, but he caught the flash of indignation in her eyes at the implied accusation. "Mr. Reed wants them questioned," the guard insisted. "And the sheriff wants them at his office," Mason countered. "Law takes precedence over private security. Unless you'd like to explain to the sheriff why you're obstructing justice, The guards exchanged uncertain glances. Mason pressed his advantage. "I'll take full responsibility. You can tell Mr. Reed where to find them." After a moment's hesitation, the guard stepped aside. Mason gestured for the women to follow him, maintaining his official demeanor until they reached the service entrance. "We need to move quickly," he murmured as they slipped into the alley behind the hotel. "Reed recognized me. Payne knows we're here." Did you get what we needed? Elena asked. Mason shook his head. Couldn't access the office. But I planted seeds of doubt with Reed. If we're lucky, he and Payne will be at each other's throats soon enough. Luck is for gamblers, Elena said grimly. We need more than that. A whistle from the street drew their attention. Burke appeared at the alley entrance, motioning urgently. Payne's men are searching the building. We need to go. Now. They hurried to where Burke had left a wagon, climbing in as he flicked the reins. The horses pulled away just as shouts erupted from the hotel entrance. What happened? Burke demanded as they put distance between themselves and the hotel. Reed recognized me, Mason explained. I tried to use it to our advantage, but now Payne knows exactly who's after him, Burke finished. So much for gathering evidence quietly. We did learn something, Elena interjected. While serving drinks, I overheard Payne telling investors about special drilling equipment arriving tomorrow by train, something called an artesian excavator from Chicago. Burke's brow furrowed. That's industrial water drilling machinery. Expensive. Confirms he's after the aquifer, not gold. He mentioned the equipment would be taken directly to Silver Peak, Anya added softly, and that operations would begin at dawn the following day. Mason exchanged concerned glances with Burke. If he starts drilling into Soul Spring without proper understanding, he could collapse the entire underground system, Elena finished, destroying water sources across the territory. Burke guided the wagon down back streets, avoiding the main thoroughfare where Payne's men would be watching. My house isn't safe anymore. They'll search there first. Where can we go? Anya asked, fear evident in her voice. Burke considered for a moment. The old McAllister place, outside town. Scott's family that lost their patriarch last winter. Good people. Helped me when I first came to Redemption. Mason nodded. They'll have questions. Let me handle Margaret McAllister, Burke replied with grim humor. Formidable woman, hates Payne more than anyone after he tried to seize their water rights last year. The wagon rumbled through darkness toward the outskirts of Redemption, the town's lights receding behind them. Stars blazed overhead in the clear desert night, indifferent to human concerns below. Elena sat beside Mason on the wagon bench, her borrowed servant's dress ghostly in the moonlight. Her face had returned to its mask of stoic determination, but Mason had glimpsed the fear beneath when Reed had appeared. Not fear for herself, but for her sister and people. We need to warn your cousin Tarak, Mason said quietly. If Payne knows about the map pieces, he'll go after the second fragment, Elena acknowledged, but Thunder Mountain is 2 days' ride from here. We'll never reach it in time. There might be another way, Burke called from the driver's seat. The McAllisters keep carrier pigeons. Old country tradition. If you can write a message in Apache, they might be able to get word to your people. Hope flickered in Elena's eyes. It could work, if the birds fly high enough to avoid hawks. The McAllister Ranch appeared ahead, a sturdy 2-story house with a large barn and corral. Despite the late hour, lamps still burned in the windows. As they approached, the front door opened to reveal a tall woman with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun, a shotgun resting comfortably in her arms. Samuel Burke, she called, her Scottish brogue thick with suspicion. What trouble brings you to my door at this ungodly hour? Burke reined the horses to a stop. The worst kind, Margaret. Payne's kind. The woman's expression hardened. Then you'd best come in before his dogs pick up your scent. Dawn found Mason sitting on the McAllister's front porch, cleaning his Colt as first light painted the eastern horizon. His side ached from the bullet wound, but Burke's field dressing had held. Inside, he could hear Elena and Margaret McAllister deep in conversation, an unlikely alliance forged in mutual hatred of Alexander Payne. The door creaked open, and Burke joined him, offering a steaming cup of coffee. Sleep at all? The sheriff asked. Mason shook his head. Too much to consider. Burke settled onto the porch step beside him. Margaret's agreed to help. Her boys will ride to neighboring ranches, spread word about Payne's real plans for the gold mine. Elena's message has been sent by pigeon to Thunder Mountain. Will it be enough? Mason wondered aloud. To stop Payne? No. Burke sipped his coffee. But it might slow him down until we can gather more evidence. Mason reassembled his pistol with practiced ease. Evidence won't stop a man like Payne, you know that, Sam. Maybe not, Burke conceded. But I still believe in the law, Mason, even out here. Mason smiled faintly. Always were the idealist among us. And you were always the pragmatist, Burke countered. Until Whispering Creek. That changed you. Mason couldn't deny it. The massacre had broken something in him. His faith in authority, in the righteousness of the badge he'd worn so proudly. What really happened that day? Burke asked quietly. You never filed a complete report. Mason's hands stilled on his weapon. We were told the ghost band was holed up in the canyon, armed and dangerous. Orders were to surround and demand surrender. His voice grew distant with memory. But when we arrived, there were no warriors, just families. Women, children, elders. I tried to call off the attack, but Captain Williams was determined to follow orders. Payne's orders, Burke added. Mason nodded grimly. When Williams wouldn't stand down, I drew on him. There was a struggle, shots fired. By the time it ended, Williams was dead by my hand, and the damage was done. Most of the band had been killed in the crossfire. You tried to stop it, Burke said. Not hard enough. Not soon enough. Mason holstered his weapon with finality. That's why I can't follow your legal path, Sam. The law failed those people. I won't fail them again. The conversation halted as the door opened once more. Elena emerged, dressed again in her traditional clothing, the servant's uniform discarded. The message is sent, she announced. If all goes well, Tarak will hide the second map fragment before Payne's men arrive. And if not, Mason asked. Elena's expression remained resolute. Then we must reach Silver Peak before Payne's drilling equipment arrives, with or without the complete map. That's suicide, Burke protested. Payne will have the place crawling with men. Not as many as you might think, came a new voice. Anya stepped onto the porch, her quiet presence almost startling. Most of his men are still searching redemption for us. The work camp at Silver Peak has minimal security. How do you know this? Mason asked. I listened while captive, Anya explained simply. Men speak freely around those they consider invisible. Mason considered this information. If we left now, rode hard, we could reach Silver Peak by nightfall, Elena finished. Assess their defenses, find the drilling site. Burke shook his head in exasperation. And then what? The four of us against however many men Payne has stationed there? 5, corrected Margaret McAllister, appearing in the doorway. My son Ian will guide you. He knows every canyon and wash between here and Silver Peak. Burke started to object, but Margaret silenced him with a stern glare. That devil Payne poisoned my husband's well last year to force us off our land. William died slow from whatever he put in our water. If there's a chance to stop him doing worse to others, a McAllister will be part of it. Her tone brooked no argument. Mason exchanged glances with Elena, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We'll need supplies, Mason said. Ammunition, water, food for 2 days. Already prepared, Margaret assured him, and fresh horses. Yours are spent. As the others went to ready themselves, Mason remained on the porch with Elena. In the growing daylight, he noticed subtle changes in her demeanor, a softening around the eyes, a less rigid set to her shoulders. Why did you really help us at the mission? She asked suddenly. The truth, not what you think I want to hear. Mason considered his answer carefully. When I saw your sister bound like that, I saw something else. The children at Whispering Creek, terrified as bullets flew around them. He met her gaze directly. I couldn't save them. Maybe I can help save what's left of your people. Elena studied him, searching for deception and finding none. Redemption requires action, not just regret, she said finally. That's why we're riding to Silver Peak, Mason agreed. A slight smile touched Elena's lips. Then perhaps you are on the path to finding it, after all. The journey to Silver Peak took them through some of the harshest terrain in the territory, jagged ravines and sun-blasted mesas where nothing grew but stubborn scrub brush. Ian McAllister, a stocky young man with his mother's deterministic stride, led them along trails invisible to untrained eyes. Pa used to hunt these canyons, he explained as they navigated a particularly treacherous descent. Said you could disappear for years if you knew the right hollows. By mid-afternoon, heat shimmered across the landscape in suffocating waves. They rested the horses in the shadow of a towering rock formation, drinking sparingly from their canteens. Silver Peak is just beyond that ridge, Ian informed them, pointing to a distant mountain silhouetted against the azure sky. Payne's camp sits at its base near the old silver mine that gave it its name. Burke studied the terrain through a spyglass. Approach is exposed. They'll see us coming from miles away. Not if we wait until dark, Mason suggested. Or, he trailed off as Elena raised a hand for silence, her head tilted in concentration. The others froze, listening. At first, Mason heard nothing but the whisper of wind through stone. Then it came, the distant rhythm of hoofbeats, approaching fast. Riders, Elena confirmed, already moving toward higher ground for a better view. Mason followed, climbing a rock outcropping that offered visibility across the basin they'd just traversed. In the distance, a dust cloud marked the progress of at least a dozen mounted men. Payne's men? Burke asked, joining them. Mason shook his head grimly. Worse, Navajo. Elena's expression tightened. How can you be certain? The pattern of their riding spread out, not in column, and the direction. They're coming from Thunder Mountain. Mason handed her the spyglass. See for yourself. Elena looked, her breath catching. They're pursuing someone. Mason focused on a lone rider well ahead of the Navajo party, pushing their mount mercilessly across the unforgiving terrain. Even at this distance, the desperation was evident in every line of horse and rider. Apache, Elena whispered. It's Tarak. As they watched, Tarak's horse stumbled, nearly sending its rider headlong. Though the animal recovered, the momentary delay allowed the pursuers to gain ground. He'll never outrun them, Burke observed grimly. Elena turned to Mason, conflict evident in her eyes. We have to help him. He carries the second map fragment. If we reveal ourselves, we lose our advantage at Silver Peak, Burke cautioned. Mason calculated distances, options, risks. Sam, take the women and Ian to the rendezvous point we discussed. I'll try to create a diversion, give Tarak a chance to reach you. I'm coming with you, Elena insisted. No, Mason countered firmly. If both map fragments fall into Navajo hands, everything we fought for is lost. You need to protect what you carry. For a moment, he thought she would argue further. Instead, she touched the pouch at her neck, then nodded once. Be careful. These Navajo are not like those we know. They have allied with Payne for reasons of their own. All the more reason to keep the fragments separated, Mason replied. Go. I'll find you by nightfall. As the others descended toward their horses, Mason turned back to observe Tarak's desperate flight. The young Apache was skilled, using the terrain to maximum advantage, but the pursuit was relentless. They would overtake him before he could reach the rendezvous point. Mason checked his ammunition, then mounted his horse and rode toward a narrow pass where Tarak would likely emerge. It offered the best position for what he had in mind, a controlled ambush to scatter the pursuit without causing casualties if possible. He reached the position with minutes to spare, securing his horse behind a boulder before climbing to a ledge overlooking the pass. Below, the trail wound between sheer rock walls barely wide enough for two riders abreast. Perfect, Tarak appeared first. His horse lathered with sweat and bleeding from a wound on its flank. The animal was near collapse, stumbling more frequently now. Behind him, the Navajo pursuers had closed to within a few hundred yards, war cries carrying on the hot, still air. Mason waited until Tarak had cleared the pass, then fired two shots in rapid succession. The bullets struck rock just ahead of the lead Navajo riders, sending fragments and dust spraying into the air. The riders reined up sharply, confused by the invisible attack. Mason fired again, this time striking the ground between the horses' feet. The animals reared in panic, nearly unseating their riders. Taking advantage of the chaos, Mason fired a controlled sequence of shots, creating the impression of multiple attackers in the rocks above. The strategy worked. After a brief consultation, the Navajo retreated back the way they had come, unwilling to risk an ambush in such confined terrain. Mason waited until they were well away before descending to check on Tarak. He found the young Apache warrior collapsed beside his dying horse, blood staining his buckskin shirt from what appeared to be an arrow wound in his shoulder. Tarak drew his knife as Mason approached, eyes wild with pain and fear. I'm not your enemy, Mason said, holstering his weapon and raising empty hands. Elena sent me. Tarak's eyes narrowed with suspicion. The White Ranger, the one who led the massacre? Former Ranger, Mason corrected grimly. And yes, I bear that shame. Tarak wavered, knife still raised. Why would Elena trust you? Because I'm helping her stop pain from destroying Soul Spring, Mason replied simply, as I'm trying to help you now. After a moment's hesitation, Tarak lowered the knife. The others? Safe, heading to our rendezvous point. Mason knelt beside the wounded man. Can you ride? My horse can carry us both for a short distance. Tarak nodded weakly. The Navajo, they came without warning. Our scouts had no chance. Payne's doing, Mason surmised, helping Tarak to his feet. Did you secure the map fragment? A ghost of a smile crossed the young warrior's face. He reached into his shirt, withdrawing a small object wrapped in leather. I would die before letting this fall into enemy hands. Let's make sure it doesn't come to that, Mason replied, helping him toward the waiting horse. They rode double through winding canyons, following Ian's shortcut toward the rendezvous point. Tarak's wound continued bleeding despite Mason's makeshift bandage, and the young man's strength was clearly fading. Tell me about Soul Spring, Mason said, trying to keep Tarak conscious. What makes it so valuable that men would kill for it? Tarak's voice came weakly. It is not just water. It is the blood of the earth itself. Pure, unending, life-giving. The old ones say it connects to underground rivers that stretch across the entire territory. His breath hitched with pain as the horse negotiated a steep descent. But it must be approached with respect. Take too much, too quickly. And what happens? Mason prompted when Tarak fell silent. The earth dies, Tarak whispered, and everything that depends upon it. They rode in silence after that, Mason's thoughts troubled by the implications. If Tarak spoke true, Payne's industrial drilling could trigger a catastrophe beyond mere water theft, ecological devastation on a scale the territory had never seen. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they finally reached the rendezvous point, a sheltered box canyon with a small spring. Elena rushed forward as Mason helped Tarak from the horse, her face tight with concern. He's been shot, Mason explained as they laid the young warrior on a blanket. Arrow wound, bleeding heavily. Elena examined the injury with practiced hands. The arrowhead is still inside. We need to remove it before infection sets in. While she prepared to treat the wound, Tarak handed the leather pouch to Mason. You've earned the right to carry this, Ranger, until I am strong again. Mason accepted the responsibility solemnly, securing the second map fragment alongside his ammunition. Burke approached, his expression grave. We've got trouble, the sheriff announced. Ian scouted ahead towards Silver Peak. Payne's drilling equipment has already arrived, a full day early. They're setting up now, with plans to begin operations at first light. Mason exchanged alarmed glances with Elena. How many men? At least 20, Burke replied. Armed guards around the perimeter, engineers from Chicago supervising the assembly. We're out of time, Elena said, looking up from Tarak's wound. If they begin drilling by morning, then we move tonight, Mason decided, under cover of darkness. Burke shook his head in disbelief. 5 against 20? Those are suicide odds, Mason. 7, came a weak voice. They turned to see Tarak struggling to sit up despite Elena's protests. My people will come. I sent a signal before the Navajo attacked. Even if they come, they won't arrive in time, Mason pointed out gently. Tarak's dark eyes burned with determination. Then we must delay Payne until they do. As night fell over the canyon, they gathered around a small, shielded fire to finalize their desperate plan. Mason spread a rough map of Silver Peak drawn by Ian, marking guard positions and the drilling site. The equipment is vulnerable, Mason explained. Delicate machinery that won't function if key components are damaged. Sabotage, Burke concluded. Mason nodded. Precisely. We don't need to defeat Payne's men in direct confrontation. We just need to cripple the drill. Elena studied the map intently. What about the workers? The children Anya mentioned? They're kept in a separate compound. Here, Ian indicated a cluster of small buildings, guarded but not as heavily as the main site. Then we have 2 objectives, Elena decided. Free the captives and disable the drill. We'll split into teams, Mason agreed. Elena, Anya, and I will handle the drill. Burke, Ian, and Tarak focus on the captives. I should come with you, Burke argued. The drill will have the heaviest security. Mason shook his head. The captives will trust you more than me. You have the badge, the authority. If something goes wrong, you can claim official business. As they finalized details, Mason noticed Anya sitting slightly apart, her expression troubled. He moved to join her, offering his canteen. Having second thoughts, he asked quietly. Anya accepted the water, her voice barely above a whisper. Not about stopping pain, about what comes after. Mason understood her concern. One battle at a time, he advised. We survive tonight, then worry about tomorrow. Is that how you've lived since Whispering Creek? She asked with unexpected insight. One day at a time, never looking ahead? The question struck closer to home than Mason cared to admit. It's kept me alive. But not living, Anya observed softly. There's a difference. Before Mason could respond, Elena called them back to the fire. The time had come to move out. As they doused the flames and prepared their weapons, Mason felt the familiar calm of pre-battle settling over him, a clarity of purpose that had been absent from his life for too long. Tonight, they would strike a blow against Alexander Payne. Whether it would be enough to stop him remained to be seen, but at least they would no longer be running. Tonight, they would take the fight to the enemy's doorstep. As they mounted their horses and rode towards Silver Peak, the waning moon cast long shadows across the desert. Somewhere in the darkness ahead lay Payne's operation, and possibly their deaths. But for the first time since Whispering Creek, Mason Blackwood rode with purpose rather than regret. Perhaps, he reflected, that was a form of redemption in itself. Silver Peak loomed against the star-strewn sky, its jagged silhouette reminiscent of a beast's teeth. At its base, Payne's camp glowed with lantern light, a cluster of tents, temporary structures, and the hulking shadow of the drilling equipment. Mason, Elena, and the others observed from a ridge half a mile distant, counting guards and mapping approach routes. More men than we expected, Burke murmured, lowering his spyglass. I count at least 30, not 20. Mason nodded grimly. Payne's not taking Ashinas must have pulled in reinforcements after our escape. Elena pointed toward a cylindrical structure rising from the camp's center. The drill. It's already partially assembled. And there, Anya added softly, indicating a fenced compound where small figures moved between long, low buildings. The captives. Mason studied the layout, revising their plan mentally. The guard pattern is predictable. Perimeter patrols every 15 minutes, stationary sentries at key points. Main activity centered on the drill site. We still splitting into teams? Burke asked. Has to be, Mason confirmed. But we'll need a distraction first. Something to draw attention away from both targets. Ian McAllister cleared his throat. The supply wagons. They're staged on the north side away from the main camp. Couple barrels of blasting powder among the supplies, I'd wager. Mason raised an eyebrow. How do you know that? My pa was a silver miner before a rancher, Ian explained. No drilling operation runs without blasting powder, especially in this terrain. A controlled explosion, Burke mused. Far enough not to hurt anyone, but close enough to draw attention. I can handle that, Ian offered. Set a long fuse, be well away before it blows. Mason nodded approval. Good. While the guards respond to the explosion, Elena, Anya, and I will move on the drill. Burke, you and Tarak head for the captives. Get them out through the southern ravine we marked earlier. Tarak, still weak but insistent on participating, looked skeptical. How do we ensure they follow us? Many will be frightened, not understanding. I'll go with Burke, Anya volunteered unexpectedly. The children know me. They'll trust me more than strangers. Elena began to protest, but Anya silenced her with a raised hand. Sister, I've been their fellow captive. I know their fears. Let me do this. After a moment's hesitation, Elena nodded. Be careful, little one. They synchronized their timepieces, old military watches carried by Mason and Burke, and agreed on a rendezvous point 3 miles south of camp. Ian would trigger the distraction in exactly 40 minutes, giving them time to reach their positions. As they prepared to separate, Elena drew Mason aside, her face somber in the moonlight. If something happens to me, the map fragment, nothing's going to happen to you, Mason interrupted. Listen, she insisted. If I fall, both fragments must reach Thunder Mountain. My people will know what to do with them. Mason reluctantly nodded his understanding. Same goes for me. If I don't make it, get the fragment I'm carrying to your people. Elena studied him with an intensity that seemed to pierce through his carefully maintained facade. You speak as someone prepared to die. I've been prepared for that since Whispering Creek, Mason admitted. Maybe before. Yet you fight to live, she observed. There's a contradiction in you, Mason Blackwood. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Isn't there in all of us? Before she could respond, Burke signaled it was time to move. They parted without further words, each carrying unspoken thoughts as they descended toward the camp. Mason led Elena and Tarak along a dry creek bed that offered concealment to within 100 yards of the perimeter. They settled into position, watching the clockwork movement of guards while waiting for Ian's distraction. Tell me about your father, Mason said quietly to Elena, partly to pass time, partly from genuine curiosity. Elena glanced at him, surprised by the question. Wait, because I hunted a man whose face I never saw based on stories and rumors. I'd like to know who he really was. Elena's expression softened slightly. Kitchi was a healer before a warrior. He knew the old ways, the songs that could mend broken bodies and spirits. Her voice took on a distant quality, as if seeing across years. When drought came, he could find water where others saw only dust. When sickness spread, his medicine saved many. Not the bloodthirsty, savage pain described, Mason noted. No, Elena agreed, though he could fight when necessary. He taught us that violence should be the last choice, not the first. A sad smile touched her lips. He would be disappointed that I've carried hatred for so long. Hatred kept you alive, Mason suggested. Perhaps, but at what cost? Her gaze shifted from the camp to Mason's weathered face. What about your father? Was he a ranger too? Mason shook his head. Preacher, fire and brimstone type. Believed the world was divided neatly into signers and saved, with most falling into the first category. Including you? A humorless chuckle escaped him. Especially me. Never could live up to his standards. Joined the Rangers partly to escape his judgment. Mason paused, surprised by his own candor. Haven't spoken to him in 20 years. Don't even know if he's still alive. Elena seemed about to respond when a tremendous explosion rocked the night. The northern edge of camp erupted in flames. The supply wagons transformed into a towering inferno that reached toward the stars. Shouts of alarm echoed across the camp as guards abandoned their posts, rushing toward the blaze. That's our cue, Mason whispered, checking his Colt one last time. Stay low. Stay quiet. They moved swiftly through shadow, taking advantage of the chaos. Guards who might have spotted them were focused on the fire, now spreading to nearby tents. Mason led them toward the drilling equipment, an imposing contraption of iron and steel that gleamed dully in the firelight. 2 engineers remained at the drill site, too dedicated to their work to be drawn away by the distraction. Mason signaled Elena and Tarak to circle behind them while he approached directly, his badge visible. Gentlemen, he called, his tone authoritative. Fire Marshal, need you to clear this area immediately. The engineers turned in surprise, one reaching for a nearby rifle. Mason's gun appeared in his hand before the man could touch the weapon. That would be unwise, he advised calmly. Fire's reaching the blasting powder storage. This whole area could go up any minute. The younger engineer paled visibly. But the equipment can be replaced, Mason cut him off. Your lives can't. Now move. Elena and Tarak emerged from the shadows behind them, their own weapons raised. The engineers, seeing themselves outflanked, reluctantly moved away from the drill. Hands where I can see them, Mason ordered. Walk toward the main camp, slowly. Once the engineers were safely distant, Mason turned to the drilling machine. We don't have much time. Tarak, watch our backs. Elena, help me find the vulnerable points. They worked quickly, Mason drawing on knowledge gained during his ranger years spent protecting mining operations. Control valves here, he indicated brass fittings along the main pump assembly. Pressure gauges, hydraulic lines. Elena produced a small leather pouch from her belt. Crushed quartz mixed with resin, she explained, packing the substance into crucial joints and valves. When they try to start the machine, friction will cause it to seize completely. Mason removed his knife, slicing through rubber hoses and wiring. This buys time, but pain will repair it eventually. Time is what we need, Elena replied, working efficiently. For my people to reach Thunder Mountain, to secure Soul Spring before pain can find it. A shout from Tarak warned of approaching guards. Hurry! Mason jammed his knife into the control box, twisting it to destroy the mechanisms inside. Elena finished sabotaging the pump assembly, then joined him in destroying the gauges and valves. That's enough, Mason decided. Let's move before a gunshot cracked through the air. Tarak staggered, clutching his side. Behind him, Sebastian Reed emerged from the shadows, pistol raised. I told you this wasn't over, Blackwood, Reed said coldly. Mason pushed Elena behind the drill mechanism, drawing his own weapon. Always did have bad timing, Reed. Reed's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. On the contrary, Mr. Payne will be pleased I caught you in the act. His gaze shifted to Elena, and with such interesting company. The fire's spreading, Mason observed, noting the blaze had grown considerably. Might want to worry about that instead of us. A convenient distraction you arranged, Reed acknowledged, but not enough to save you this time. Tarak, despite his wound, lunged suddenly toward Reed. The enforcer fired again, but the young Apache had anticipated it, dropping low. The bullet passed overhead, or Tarak crashed into Reed's legs, sending both men tumbling. Whooshire! Tarak shouted to Mason and Elena. Complete the mission. Mason hesitated, torn between helping Tarak and escaping with Elena. Reed and the Apache warrior grappled in the dust, each fighting for control of Reed's pistol. A second gunshot echoed, followed by a terrible stillness. Tarak rolled away from Reed, blood spreading across his shirt. But Reed remained motionless, a look of surprise frozen on his face as crimson bloomed at his chest. The gun, discharged during struggle, Tarak gasped, struggling to stand. Help me. Mason rushed forward, supporting Tarak as Elena gathered their supplies. Together, they hurried away from the drill site, keeping to the shadows as guards and workers focused on containing the spreading fire. The others? Elena asked as they reached the edge of camp. Mason checked his watch. Should be at the rendezvous point by now, if all went according to plan. They made their way south, Tarak leaning heavily on Mason. The young warrior's strength was fading fast, his breathing labored. When they finally reached the sheltered canyon serving as their meeting point, Burke and the others were already waiting. Thank God, Burke breathed upon seeing them. Behind him, 24 frightened children and young adults huddled together, Anya moving among them with reassuring words. Tarak's hit, Mason reported, easing the warrior to the ground where Elena could examine his wounds. Reed? Burke asked. Dead, Mason confirmed. But there'll be pursuit once they get the fire under control. We need to move. Elena looked up from Tarak, her expression grave. He can't ride. The bullet went deep. Tarak gripped Mason's wrist with surprising strength. Leave me. Get the children to safety. Not happening, Mason replied firmly. Burke, can we rig a travois? The sheriff nodded, already moving to organize materials. Ian, help me with these branches. While they worked, Mason took stock of the rescued captives, Apache and Navajo children ranging from 7 to 16, along with a few older teens. All showed signs of hard labor and poor treatment, their thin faces marked with exhaustion and fear. Anya approached, her voice low. They were forced to work the test drilling sites. Those who resisted were beaten. Some died. Anger flared in Mason's chest, a cold, familiar feeling. Payne will answer for this. He already knows you destroyed the main drill, Anya reported. I overheard the guards. He's furious, offering gold for your capture, dead or alive. Not the first bounty on my head, Mason remarked dryly. Won't be the last. Elena joined them, wiping Tarak's blood from her hands. He's stabilized for now, but needs proper care soon. How far to the nearest friendly settlement? Mason asked. 2 days' ride to Eagle Canyon, Elena replied. My people have a summer camp there. Burke returned with the completed travois. This will hold Tarak, but it'll slow us down considerably. We don't have a choice, Mason said, helping them secure the wounded warrior to the makeshift carrier. These children need protection, and Tarak has earned our loyalty. They set out before dawn, a somber procession moving through barren landscapes. Mason and Burke took turns scouting ahead and guarding the rear, watching for pursuit. By mid-morning, exhaustion began claiming its toll on the children, many of whom had been malnourished for weeks. We need to rest, Elena insisted as one young girl collapsed from heat and fatigue. Just for an hour, Mason scanned the horizon, troubled by their vulnerability. There's a box canyon about half a mile ahead, better protection than this open ground. They resumed their journey, reaching the canyon just as the sun reached its zenith. Steep walls provided shade and concealment, while a small seep at the canyon's rear offered precious water. The children drank gratefully, then settled into what shade they could find. Mason climbed to a vantage point to watch their back trail, Burke joining him after ensuring the others were settled. "See anything?" the sheriff asked. Mason shook his head. "Not yet, but they're coming." Burke studied his friend's face. "You've changed, Mason, since we rode together." "We all have," Mason replied without looking away from the horizon. "That's not what I mean." Burke chose his words carefully. "You were always driven, but there was joy in you once, purpose beyond the next fight." Mason remained silent, unsure how to respond. After Whispering Creek, he'd locked away the man he'd been, the idealistic ranger who believed justice always prevailed. That man had died alongside the Apache at the massacre. "Elena," Burke said simply, "she reminds you of who you were." Mason finally turned to his friend, surprise evident in his expression. "I've seen how you look at her," Burke continued. "Not just respect or guilt, something more." "She's the daughter of a man I hunted," Mason reminded him. "A people I helped destroy. And yet here you are fighting to save what remains." Burke placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe that's how redemption works, Mason. Not through death, but through living differently." Before Mason could respond, a glint of light in the distance caught his attention, sunlight reflecting off metal or glass. He raised his spyglass, focusing on the distant ridge. "Riders," he reported tersely, "at least a dozen. Moving fast." Burke squinted in the indicated direction. "Payne's men?" "Worse," Mason replied, lowering the spyglass. "Cavalry." Captain James Foster of the 5th Cavalry surveyed the ragtag group assembled before him with thinly veiled contempt. His patrol had surrounded the canyon efficiently, cutting off any escape routes before Mason or the others could react. "Mason Blackwood," Foster remarked, his tone conversational despite the rifle aimed at Mason's chest. "Wanted for interference with territorial business, destruction of private property, and—" He glanced at Reed's badge pinned to a young lieutenant's uniform. "The murder of a territorial marshal." "Reed was no marshal," Burke objected, stepping forward. "I'm the sheriff of Redemption, and I can attest that Reed worked for Alexander Payne as a hired gun." Foster raised an eyebrow. "Strange company you're keeping these days, Burke. Renegade Rangers, Apache hostiles." "These are children," Elena interjected fiercely, "kidnapped and forced into labor. We rescued them from Payne's Elysian operation." "So you say," Foster replied dismissively. "Mr. Payne says otherwise. Claims you attacked his mining operation and stole indentured workers legally contracted through the Bureau of Indian Affairs." Mason's jaw tightened. "There's no legal contract for child labor, Captain. You know that as well as I do." Foster shrugged. "Not my concern. My orders are to apprehend you and return these Indians to Mr. Payne's custody." "By whose authority?" Burke demanded. "Territorial governor," Foster replied, producing an official-looking document. "Signed yesterday. Apparently Mr. Payne has friends in high places." Mason exchanged glances with Elena, their situation growing more desperate by the moment. The cavalry had them surrounded, outgunned, with no reasonable hope of resistance or escape. "The children stay with us," Mason stated firmly. "Whatever charges you have against me, they're innocent." Foster's expression hardened. "Don't test my patience, Blackwood. My orders are clear." "Your orders are based on lies," Elena cut in. "Payne is destroying sacred water sources that sustain this entire region. He manipulated your government to steal our land, massacred my people at Whispering Creek, and now enslaves our children." Foster's attention shifted to Elena, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Whispering Creek? You're Kitchy's daughter." Lena stiffened in surprise. "You knew my father?" A complex emotion crossed Foster's face, too quickly to identify. "I knew of him." He turned back to Mason. "Is what she says true about Whispering Creek?" Mason held the captain's gaze steadily. "Every word. Payne engineered the massacre to drive the Apache off their land. I led the ranger detachment that carried it out, based on his false intelligence. And you expect me to believe a disgraced ranger over a territorial commissioner?" Foster asked, though something in his tone had shifted. I expect you to look at evidence, Mason countered, nodding toward the rescued children. These aren't workers, Captain. They're captives, some no older than 7 or 8. Foster studied the frightened faces of the children, his military discipline warring visibly with basic human decency. After a long moment, he lowered his rifle slightly. Lieutenant Harris, he called to a young officer, interview these children. I want to know their ages, how they came to be in Payne's camp, and conditions of their employment. Sir, the lieutenant questioned uncertainly. Do it, Foster ordered sharply, and send Corporal Jenkins to examine the wounded Apache. We'll make no final decisions until I have all facts before me. While the soldiers carried out these orders, Foster gestured for Mason, Burke, and Elena to join him apart from the others. I'm taking a significant risk even listening to you, he informed them in a low voice. Payne has the governor's ear and half the territorial council in his pocket. Why listen at all? Mason asked bluntly. Foster's weathered face revealed little. Let's just say I've had my own doubts about Alexander Payne, particularly regarding Whispering Creek. You were there? Elena asked, a tremor in her voice. Foster shook his head. Afterward, my patrol was assigned to verify casualties. What we found, he paused, old memories darkening his eyes. It didn't match the official account. Women, children, elders, not warriors prepared for battle. Mason felt a painful tightening in his chest. For 3 years, he'd carried the burden of Whispering Creek alone, believing no one else had questioned the official narrative. Why didn't you report it? Burke asked. I did, Foster replied grimly. My report was buried. 2 weeks later, I was transferred to Border Patrol. A humorless smile touched his lips. Military bureaucracy has its own ways of silencing inconvenient truths. Lieutenant Harris returned, his young face troubled. Sir, I've interviewed several children. Their accounts are disturbing. Abduction, forced labor, physical abuse. None were paid or contracted as claimed. Foster absorbed this information with a tight jaw. And the wounded man? Gunshot wound, severe but not immediately life-threatening, Jenkins reported. He claims he was shot while defending a woman from Payne's enforcer. Mason watched Foster carefully, recognizing the internal struggle of a man whose duty conflicted with his conscience. He'd faced the same at Whispering Creek and failed the test. Captain, Mason said quietly, sometimes a man has to choose between following orders and following what's right. Foster's eyes met his, understanding passing between them. Like you did when you tried to stop the massacre? Mason nodded once. After a long moment, Foster straightened, decision made. Lieutenant Harris, we're escorting these people to Fort Defiance. The children will receive medical attention while we investigate these allegations properly. Sir, Harris questioned, our orders have been modified based on evidence of criminal activity. Foster cut him off. I'll take full responsibility. Relief washed through Mason, though he kept his expression neutral. Fort Defiance housed the Indian Agency Office, potentially allies in exposing Payne's crimes. What about us? Elena asked cautiously. Foster regarded her thoughtfully. You'll remain in custody pending investigation. If your claims prove true, you'll be released. His gaze shifted to Mason, though Blackwood has other charges to answer for. I understand, Mason acknowledged. As the soldiers prepared for departure, Elena drew Mason aside. Can we trust him? Foster's a career soldier, Mason replied, but he's got a conscience. That's more than most in his position. And if his conscience fails when tested? Elena pressed. Mason touched the leather pouch containing his map fragment, ensuring it remained secure. Then we'll need another plan. Burke joined them, expression troubled. Mason, I've been thinking about Payne's next move. If he can't access Soul Spring through drilling, he'll try another approach, Mason finished grimly, possibly more direct. The fragments, Elena whispered. If we're taken to Fort Defiance, they'll be found and confiscated, Mason concluded. We need to get at least one fragment to your people. Burke glanced toward the soldiers. I could take it. Foster's focused on you two. I might be able to slip away. Mason considered this option. Too risky. You'd be branded an outlaw, lose everything. Some things matter more than a badge, Burke replied simply. Before they could decide, Tarak called weakly from his travois. Mason and Elena moved to his side, kneeling beside the wounded warrior. The fragments, Tarak gasped, his voice barely audible, must reach Thunder Mountain. We're working on it, Mason assured him. Tarak's fevered gaze focused on Elena. There is another way, the secret path, our grandfather's teaching. Elena's brow furrowed. What do you mean? The fragments, Tarak continued. Together they show more than just the route to Soul Spring. They contain a message only our people can read. Mason exchanged puzzled glances with Elena. What message? Tarak's voice weakened further. About the guardian, the one who protects the water. His hand clutched Mason's wrist with surprising strength. Trust no one at the fort. Payne has spies everywhere. Captain Foster approached, ending their private conversation. Time to move out. The wounded will ride in our supply wagon. As soldiers helped transfer Tarak, Mason noted the sun's position. Late afternoon, Inanan. They'd reach Fort Defiance by nightfall. Where Payne's influence might outweigh Foster's temporary sympathy, they needed a contingency plan. Elena seemed to read his thoughts. As they mounted horses provided by the cavalry, she whispered, "Tonight, when they make camp, be ready." Mason nodded imperceptibly. Whatever Elena had in mind, he would follow her lead. Their mission had evolved beyond personal redemption or even rescuing captives. Now they carried the fate of an entire region's water supply. As the cavalcade moved out, Mason took one last look at the harsh landscape surrounding them. Somewhere beyond those distant mesas lay Thunder Mountain and the answers they sought. The question was whether they would live long enough to find them. Twilight painted the New Mexico desert in shades of indigo and crimson as Captain Foster's cavalry patrol made camp in a sheltered arroyo. The rescued children huddled together near a central fire while soldiers established a perimeter of picket posts. Mason, Elena, and Burke had been placed under loose guard, not shackled, but clearly prisoners. Tarak's condition had worsened during the journey. The wagon's constant jostling reopened his wound, and fever now gripped him. He lay on a bedroll near the medical wagon, attended by a young cavalry surgeon who looked barely old enough to shave. "How is he?" Mason asked as the doctor straightened from examining Tarak. The surgeon wiped his hands on a cloth, expression grim. "Not good. The bullet fragmented internally. He needs proper hospital care, not field medicine." "Will he survive the night?" Elena asked bluntly. The young doctor hesitated. "I've given him morphine for the pain. Beyond that," he shrugged helplessly, "I've done all I can." As the surgeon moved away to check on other patients, Elena knelt beside her kinsman, whispering words in Apache that Mason couldn't understand. Tarak's eyes fluttered open, recognition flickering briefly before pain clouded his gaze again. "He's trying to tell us something," Elena murmured to Mason, "about the fragments." Mason glanced toward their guard, a young private who seemed more interested in the cook's preparations than his prisoners. "What's he saying?" "It's not clear." Elena leaned closer to Tarak, listening intently to his fevered whispers. When she straightened, her expression had changed subtly, determination replacing uncertainty. "We need to leave tonight, all of us. Foster's men are vigilant," Mason cautioned, "and we have wounded children. If we reach Fort Defiance, we're finished," Elena insisted. "Tarak says Payne's influence there is even stronger than we feared. The Indian agent is in his pocket." Burke joined them, keeping his voice low. "She's right, Mason. I've been watching the officers. They've been sending and receiving dispatches all afternoon. Something's happening that Foster isn't sharing with us." Mason considered their options, each more desperate than the last. The cavalry patrol numbered 24 men, well-armed and disciplined. Even if they could somehow overcome the guard, traveling with wounded and children across hostile terrain would be nearly impossible. "We need help," he concluded. Elena nodded toward the southern horizon. "It's coming, look." Mason followed her gaze. At first, he saw nothing unusual in the deepening twilight. Then he noticed it. Faint patterns in the distant sky, easily dismissed as birds or heat distortion. But Mason recognized the ancient Apache method of communication. Smoke signals, strategically placed and precisely timed. "Your people?" he asked quietly. Elena nodded. "They've been tracking us since we left Silver Peak, waiting for the right moment." How many? Enough, she replied cryptically. But we must be ready when they come. After moonset, when the night is darkest. Burke looked skeptical. And the children? Tarak? My people have prepared for this, Elena assured him. We need only create a brief distraction when the time comes. As they discussed possibilities, Captain Foster approached their small group, his expression unreadable. Blackwood, a word. Mason rose, sensing the gravity in Foster's tone. They walked a short distance from the others, stopping near the edge of camp where saguaro cacti stood like sentinels against the darkening sky. I received a wire from Fort Defiance, Foster said without preamble. You're to be held in isolation upon arrival. No visitors, no communication with others. Mason's expression remained neutral. Payne's influence? Orders come directly from the territorial governor's office, Foster confirmed. Burke and the Apache woman are to be separated from you immediately. And the children? Foster hesitated, his professional demeanor slipping momentarily. They're to be returned to Payne's custody. A clerical error has apparently been discovered in their indenture papers. Mason's jaw tightened. You know that's wrong. What I know doesn't matter, Foster replied tersely. I have orders. Orders you know are corrupt, Mason countered, based on lies that serve one man's greed. Foster's eyes flashed with irritation. What would you have me do, Blackwood? Throw away my career? Face court-martial? For people who mean nothing to me? For justice, Mason said simply. The same reason you became a soldier in the first place, I'd wager. Foster glanced back toward the camp, conflict evident in his weathered features. Justice is a luxury for men who don't answer to authority. Then look the other way, Mason suggested. When the time comes. Foster's gaze sharpened. What are you planning? Better you don't know, Mason replied evenly. Just a question of whether you'll stand with Payne's corruption or allow the truth a fighting chance. The captain studied Mason for a long moment. I admired the Texas Rangers once, thought you men stood for something greater than yourselves. Some of us still try to, Mason said quietly. Foster turned away, his decision unspoken but understood. He wouldn't help them escape, but he might not prevent it either. It was the most Mason could realistically hope for. As night settled fully over the camp, Mason rejoined Elena and Burke. Foster knows something's coming. He won't help, but he might not hinder. When? Burke asked. Moonset, about 4 hours from now. Mason glanced toward the medical wagon where Tarak lay. Will he survive being moved? He must, Elena said grimly. He carries knowledge vital to our people. Mason nodded toward the perimeter guards. We'll need a distraction. Something significant enough to draw attention, but not so alarming that they lock us down completely. Burke considered this problem. The horses, if someone were to spook them, it would create confusion without raising immediate suspicion of escape. I can handle that, Mason decided. You focus on getting Tarak ready to move. Elena, coordinate with your people, however you're communicating with them. As the camp settled into night routine, Mason observed the guards' patterns, mentally timing their rotations. Most were young recruits, disciplined but inexperienced. Their attention would naturally focus on obvious threats, not subtle manipulations. Near midnight, Lieutenant Harris approached their fire. Captain says you should get some sleep. We're moving out at first light. Appreciate the concern, Mason replied dryly. Any chance of checking on the Apache boy? He wasn't doing well earlier. Harris hesitated, then nodded. I'll walk you over, but make it quick. This unexpected opportunity allowed Mason to survey the horse picket line up close. As he'd suspected, the mounts were tethered in military fashion, efficiently but vulnerably if one knew the weakness in the system. After briefly visiting Tarak, Mason returned to their fire with valuable intelligence. Horses are secured with standard cavalry pickets. One central line, secondary tethers for each mount. Cut the main line, chaos ensues, Burke surmised. Exactly. And I spotted our gear stacked near the supply wagon. They haven't distributed it to the men yet. Elena, who had been seemingly dozing, opened her eyes. The moon sets in 1 hour. My people will approach from the southwest arroyo. We'll have a small window of opportunity. They waited, tension building as the camp grew quieter. Most soldiers slept now, with only sentries remaining alert. The moon, a slim crescent, dipped toward the western horizon. Almost time, Elena whispered. Mason removed his boots, preparing to move silently. Once it starts, get to the children quickly. They'll be frightened by the commotion. Burke nodded, his hand slipping inside his boot to withdraw a small knife he'd concealed from their captors. What about Foster? Leave him to me, Mason replied. As the moon's final light faded, Mason made his move, slipping between shadows toward the horse line. The sentry paced methodically, his attention focused outward for external threats rather than behind him. Mason timed his movements to the guard's pattern, freezing when the man turned, advancing when his back was presented. Reaching the picket line, Mason withdrew a small flint he'd palmed from the campfire. The trick would be creating enough chaos without immediately revealing human intervention. He selected a high-strung bay at the end of the line, approaching carefully from its blind spot. The technique was one he'd learned from Comanche raiders years ago, a sharp, sudden pain followed by a startling sound. Mason struck the horse's flank with a quick chim, simultaneously producing a sharp whistle between his teeth. The bay reared in panic, pulling against its tether and jostling the horses on either side. Mason melted back into darkness as the sentry rushed to calm the agitated animals. But the damage was done. Horses kicked and pulled against their restraints, creating a cascade of equine panic. Within moments, the central picket line snapped, freeing half a dozen mounts that immediately bolted into the darkness. Shouts of alarm spread through the camp. Soldiers scrambled from bedrolls, officers barked orders, and general confusion reigned. In the chaos, Mason circled back toward their campfire, where Burke had already begun gathering the children. Elena appeared at his side, materializing from shadow. Our people are in position. Southwest ravine. As the cavalry focused on recapturing their horses, Mason, Burke, and Elena moved the children in small groups toward the designated ravine. Anya led the first group, while Ian McAllister helped with Tarak, carrying the wounded warrior despite his own exhaustion. They had nearly reached the ravine's edge when a voice called from behind them. That's far enough, Blackwood. Mason turned to find Captain Foster standing 20 yards away, revolver aimed steadily at his chest. The officer stood alone, having apparently separated from his men to pursue the escapees personally. You don't want to do this, Foster, Mason said calmly. No, I don't, Foster agreed, his expression grim. But neither do I want to face court-martial for dereliction of duty. Elena stepped forward. These children will die if returned to pain. You know this. Foster's aim didn't waver, but indecision flickered across his face. I have orders. You have a conscience, too, Mason reminded him. Otherwise, you wouldn't be standing here alone instead of bringing your entire patrol. The standoff stretched for agonizing seconds. Behind them, Burke continued guiding children into the ravine where Apache warriors waited in shadow. I could shoot you, Foster said finally. But you won't, Mason replied with certainty, because you know we're right about Pain, about Whispering Creek, about all of it. Foster's jaw worked silently, internal conflict evident in every line of his body. Finally, his shoulders sagged slightly. I'll give you 10 minutes before I sound the alarm. After that, you're on your own. Relief washed through Mason. That's all we need. Foster lowered his weapon slowly. If you're wrong about Pain, if this is all some Apache vendetta, I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth, Blackwood. If I'm wrong, I'll let you, Mason promised. Foster holstered his revolver and turned away. 10 minutes, not a second more. As the captain disappeared into the darkness, Elena touched Mason's arm. You trusted him. Calculated risk, Mason replied. He's a good man caught in a bad system. I've been there. They hurried into the ravine where a remarkable sight awaited, 20 Apache warriors on horseback, with additional mounts for the escapees. Burke had already begun helping children onto horses, while Tarak lay secured to a travois behind a sturdy pinto. My cousin Nahele, Elena introduced a tall warrior who seemed to be leading the group. He's been tracking us since Silver Peak. Nahele nodded curtly to Mason, respect and suspicion warring in his gaze. The ranger who tried to stop the massacre. Former ranger, Mason corrected, returning the nod. We need to move quickly. Foster gave us 10 minutes. The horses are ready, Nahele confirmed. We ride for Thunder Mountain. They mounted swiftly, the children doubling up with warriors for safety and speed. Mason found himself sharing a horse with Elena, her slender form fitting against him as she took the reins. "You trust me to lead?" she asked with a hint of irony. "In this territory, absolutely," Mason replied. They moved out in single file, following the ravine's twisted path away from the cavalry camp. Behind them, faint shouts indicated the soldiers were still contending with their scattered horses, a fortunate extension of their head start. The Apache led them through terrain Mason would have considered impassable in darkness. Narrow defiles, steep embankments, winding washes that appeared and disappeared like ghost rivers. Elena guided their mount with confidence, navigating by stars and landmarks invisible to Mason's eyes. "How far to Thunder Mountain, Bong?" he asked quietly. "Normally 2 days' ride," she replied, "but we'll take the secret paths. Perhaps a day and a half if we push hard." After several hours of hard riding, Nahale called a brief halt in a hidden canyon. The children were exhausted, some barely staying mounted. Tarek's condition had stabilized somewhat, though his fever remained dangerously high. Mason helped distribute water and jerky from supplies the Apache had brought. As the others rested, he climbed a ridge to scan their back trail. No sign of pursuit yet, but morning would bring cavalry trackers who knew this territory well. Lena joined him, her face ghostly in the pre-dawn light. "Worried?" "Cautious," he corrected. "Foster won't pursue himself, but he'll have to send men or face questions." "My people know ways to hide our trail," she assured him. Mason nodded toward the eastern horizon where the faintest lightning indicated approaching dawn. "What happens when we reach Thunder Mountain?" Elena's expression grew somber. "The fragments must be united at the sacred cave. Then the true path to Soul Spring will be revealed. And after that?" She studied him curiously. "You still think in terms of after? I thought you lived only for the present mission." Mason found himself unable to deny it. Somewhere along this journey, he'd begun thinking beyond immediate survival for the first time in years. "Things change. People too, sometimes." "Yes," Elena agreed softly. "They do." Nahale approached, interrupting their moment of connection. "We must move. Scouts report dust clouds to the south." "Cavalry?" Mason asked sharply. The warrior shook his head. "Different pattern. Civilian riders, many of them." "Payne's men," Elena concluded. "He must have informants at Fort Defiance who learned of our escape." Mason's mind raced through possibilities. "How would they know where to look for us?" "The fragments," Elena realized suddenly. "They must know we're heading for Thunder Mountain." This confirmed Mason's worst fears. Their destination wasn't the secret they'd hoped. "How close are we?" "Still half a day's hard ride," Nahale replied grimly. Mason made a quick decision. "We need to split up, divide their pursuit." Elena immediately shook her head. "Too dangerous." "More dangerous to be caught together with both fragments," Mason countered. "If Payne gets both, nothing stops him from finding Soul Spring." Nahale considered this logic, then nodded reluctantly. "The white man is right. We must separate." "The children and wounded go with the main group," Mason continued. "Elena, you take your fragment with them. I'll take the second fragment in another direction, draw off pursuit." "No," Elena said firmly. "I'm coming with you." "Your people need you," Mason argued. "And you need someone who knows this territory," she countered. "Nahale can lead the others to Thunder Mountain. You and I will create a false trail, then circle back using paths only my family knows." Mason recognized the determination in her eyes, the same unyielding resolve that had kept her hunting for her sister despite overwhelming odds. He wouldn't win this argument. "All right, Ann," he conceded, "but we travel light, maximum speed." They quickly reorganized. Nahale would lead the main group, including Burke, Ian, Anya, Tarak, and the children, directly to Thunder Mountain through hidden Apache routes. Mason and Elena would create an obvious trail heading east, hoping to draw Payne's men away from the vulnerable main party. As they prepared to separate, Burke approached Mason. "This is a fool's errand, you know." "Would expect nothing less from me, matey," Mason replied with grim humor. Burke clasped his arm firmly. "Watch your back. Payne's men won't take prisoners this time." "Get those children to safety," Mason responded, "and keep an eye on Tarak. His knowledge might be crucial." They parted without further sentimentality. Two men who understood that words meant less than actions in their harsh world. Elena said goodbye to her sister with a fierce embrace and whispered instructions. Then she and Mason mounted fresh horses and rode east as the others disappeared into a hidden canyon to the north. The sun climbed mercilessly toward its zenith as Mason and Elena rode across exposed plateau lands. They made no attempt to hide their trail, occasionally even doubling back to leave more obvious signs of passage. There, Elena pointed toward a dust cloud on the horizon. They've found our trail. Mason estimated the distance. 2 hours behind, perhaps less. Good. They rode hard for another hour. Then Elena guided them toward a seemingly solid rock face. Only when they were nearly upon it did Mason notice the narrow crevice, barely wide enough for a horse to pass sideways. Ancient path, Elena explained as they dismounted to lead their horses through. Known only to my grandfather's line. It will take us north, eventually connecting with Thunder Mountain from the east. The crevice opened into a winding canyon with sheer walls rising hundreds of feet on either side. The air grew noticeably cooler in this perpetual shade, a blessed relief from the punishing sun. Will they follow us in here? Mason asked, glancing at the narrow entrance. They'll try, Elena replied, but there are difficulties for those who don't know the way. Mason raised an eyebrow questioningly. You'll see, she said with the ghost of a smile. They traveled deeper into the canyon, its path twisting like a serpent through ancient stone. Occasionally, Mason noticed strange markings carved into the rock walls, symbols similar to those on the map fragments, yet different somehow. Trail signs? He asked. Elena nodded. Warnings mostly. This canyon is considered dangerous by my people. Because? Before she could answer, a low rumble echoed through the canyon. Mason tensed, hand moving to his holster. What was that? The canyon's defense, Elena replied calmly. The entrance is rigged to collapse when disturbed improperly. My grandfather's design. Mason stared at her. You mean, Payne's men won't follow us through here, she confirmed. At least not this way. Mason wasn't sure whether to be impressed or alarmed by this development. You might have mentioned this before we entered. Would it have changed your decision? She asked. He considered this, then shook his head. I suppose not. They continued deeper into the labyrinthine passage, stopping briefly to rest the horses and drink from a small seep in the canyon wall. Mason noticed Elena studying him with an unreadable expression. What? He asked finally. I'm trying to understand you, Mason Blackwood, she replied. 3 years ago, you led rangers against my people. Now you risk your life to save what remains of them. Mason stared into the distance, weighing his answer. After Whispering Creek, I had 2 choices, die from the guilt or find a way to make amends. For a long time, I chose the first option, just moving slow about it. And now, his eyes met hers, now I've found something worth living for. The admission hung between them, neither willing to elaborate further. After a moment, Elena reached into her pouch and withdrew her map fragment, studying the ancient markings. We're close to the joining place, she said. My grandfather spoke of it, where the 2 fragments were meant to be reunited. Mason removed his own fragment from its hiding place. Not Thunder Mountain? Elena shook her head. Thunder Mountain holds Soul Spring itself, but the true path is revealed only when the fragments are joined in the place of echoes. She pointed ahead. It should be near. They remounted and continued through the canyon, which gradually widened into a circular chamber with a domed ceiling. Natural openings high above allowed shafts of sunlight to penetrate, illuminating the space with golden beams. The walls were covered in ancient pictographs, hunting scenes, water symbols, and abstract designs that seemed to shimmer in the unusual light. The place of echoes, Elena breathed, dismounting reverently. Mason followed suit, the chamber's strange acoustics amplifying even their softest movements. What now? Elena guided him to a flat stone altar in the chamber's center, positioned directly beneath the largest opening in the ceiling. Here, the fragments must be placed together when the sun reaches its highest point. Mason checked the light angles. That's soon, within the hour. They laid both fragments on the stone, but they didn't quite match. The edges remained stubbornly separate despite various positioning attempts. Something's wrong, Elena murmured. They should join perfectly. Mason studied the pieces carefully. These aren't just map fragments, are they? There's more to them. Elena hesitated, then nodded. My grandfather said they contain a message about the Guardian, a spirit that protects Soul Spring. Without the Guardian's blessing, anyone attempting to access the spring would be destroyed. And how do we obtain this blessing? Mason asked. Before Elena could answer, a new sound echoed through the chamber. Footsteps approaching from a passage on the far side that Mason hadn't noticed earlier. They both drew weapons, positioning themselves protectively near the fragments. The figure that emerged from the shadow was the last person Mason expected. Alexander Payne stood before them, immaculately dressed despite the harsh terrain, a silver-headed cane in one hand and a Remington revolver in the other. Behind him came four armed men, spreading out to cover the chamber's exits. "Miss Wolfe, Mr. Blackwood," Payne's cultured voice echoed unnaturally in the domed space. "How kind of you to complete the puzzle for me." Payne. Mason kept his revolver trained on the mining magnate, though the man's four guards had already spread to strategic positions around the chamber. "How did you find this place?" Alexander Payne's thin smile never reached his eyes. "Did you think yours was the only map, Mr. Blackwood? The Apache weren't the only ones to discover Soul Spring's secrets." Elena's expression hardened. "You have no right to be here. This is sacred ground." "Sacred?" Payne chuckled, the sound distorting eerily in the chamber's acoustics. "My dear, this is simply geography, valuable geography that happens to lie beneath worthless desert." He gestured toward the altar where the fragments lay. "Now, if you'd be so kind as to step away from those pieces." Mason didn't move. "So you can destroy the water source for the entire territory? Turn it all to desert for profit?" "Progress requires sacrifice," Payne replied dismissively. "The future of this territory lies in controlled water distribution. My water, delivered through my pipelines to my settlements. Development follows resources, Mr. Blackwood." "Development follows greed in your case," Mason countered. Payne sighed theatrically. "Philosophy aside, you're outnumbered and outgunned. The fragments, please." Mason assessed their situation with a ranger's practiced eye. Four guards with rifles, plus Payne himself armed with a revolver. Multiple angles of fire, minimal cover. The odds were decisively against them. "Mason," Elena said quietly, "the sun." He glanced upward. Through the ceiling opening, sunlight had narrowed to a concentrated beam that now touched the edge of the stone altar. Within moments, it would illuminate the fragments directly. Payne followed their gaze, understanding dawning on his face. "Ah, some Apache ritual, I presume. Fascinating, but ultimately irrelevant. Indigenous superstitions won't change geological reality." "You understand nothing," Elena said, contempt filling her voice. "Soul Spring isn't just water. It's the lifeblood of this land. Take too much too quickly, and you destroy everything." "A risk I'm willing to take," Payne replied coldly. He gestured to his men. "Secure the fragments." Two guards advanced cautiously, rifles aimed at Mason and Elena. Mason calculated odds, trajectories, possibilities, and found no scenario where they both survived a firefight in this enclosed space. But before either side could act, the chamber filled with a low, resonant hum as the sunbeam touched the fragments directly. To everyone's astonishment, the pieces began to move of their own accord, edges sliding together with liquid precision until they merged seamlessly into a single piece. A blinding flash erupted from the joined fragments, temporarily stunning everyone in the chamber. When Mason's vision cleared, he saw that the complete map now hovered inches above the altar, suspended in the sunbeam as if floating on water. "My God," Payne whispered, momentarily forgetting his purpose as wonder overtook him. The merged fragments rotated slowly, ancient symbols shifting and realigning themselves like a living puzzle. As they watched, the markings began to glow with an inner light, projecting a larger image onto the chamber's dome ceiling. A detailed map of underground rivers spreading outward from a central point like arteries from a heart. "Soul Spring," Elena breathed, her face illuminated by the ethereal light. The true map. The projection continued evolving, symbols transforming into scenes. Apache ancestors discovering the spring, ritualistic protection ceremonies, warnings of catastrophic consequences if the water was misused. Finally, the image stabilized on a single location, a hidden valley within Thunder Mountain's embrace, marked by a distinctive formation resembling a wolf's head. "The Guardian's Keep," Elena translated, her voice filled with reverence. "Where water meets sky, Payne had recovered from his initial shock, cold calculation replacing wonder. Extraordinary. The exact coordinates I've sought for years. He turned to his men. Memorize that location. We move immediately. No, Mason said firmly, stepping between Payne and the altar. I can't let you do this. Payne's smile turned predatory. Your opposition has been noted, Mr. Blackwood. Repeatedly. Yet here we are. He raised his revolver with casual confidence. Step aside or die where you stand. Your choice means nothing to history. Mason didn't move. I've made my share of mistakes, Payne. Stood aside when I should have acted, not this time. Noble sentiments, Payne sneered, but ultimately futile. The tension stretched between them like a bowstring drawn to breaking point. Then, unexpectedly, Elena lowered her weapon. Wait, she said. There's something you don't understand about the Guardian, Payne. The mining magnate's attention shifted slightly. Another superstition? A truth, Elena corrected. Soul Spring can only be accessed by one deemed worthy by the Guardian. Anyone else who attempts it will find only death. Payne laughed dismissively. Tribal legends designed to frighten away competitors. I expected better from you, Miss Wolf. It's no legend, Mason interjected, following Elena's lead though uncertain of her strategy. The fragments weren't just a map, they're a key, one that requires proper understanding to use. A flicker of doubt crossed Payne's face, quickly suppressed. Explain. Elena gestured toward the still hovering map. The joining ritual we just witnessed is only the first step. The map shows the way, but the Guardian decides who passes. And who is this Guardian? Payne asked, skepticism evident, though he hadn't lowered his weapon. Not who, Elena replied. What? The Guardian is the spirit of the waters themselves. Our ancestors made a covenant. The spring would sustain us, and in return, we would protect it from those who would abuse its power. Mason watched Payne carefully, noting the calculation behind his eyes. The man wasn't superstitious, but he was cautious enough to consider all variables when millions were at stake. And how does one satisfy this Guardian? Payne asked finally. A blood offering, Elena said solemnly, from someone who knows the ancient words. The right ritual at the spring's entrance. Mason tensed, uncertain where Elena was leading this dangerous negotiation. Her strategy became clearer with her next words. I can perform this ritual, she continued, ensure safe passage to Soul Spring, in exchange for the lives of my people and their right to remain on their ancestral lands. Payne considered this proposition, suspicion warring with pragmatism. Why offer this now? Why not let me discover this Guardian the hard way? Because too many have died already, Elena answered, genuine emotion in her voice. The spring sustains all life in this region. If it's destroyed by improper access, everyone suffers. Apache, settler, soldier alike. A calculating smile spread across Payne's face. So you propose a partnership? How unexpected. A compromise, Elena corrected firmly. You gain controlled access to Soul Spring's water, but sustainable harvesting only, with my people as stewards. No drilling, no industrial machinery. Mason watched this exchange with increasing concern. Elena's strategy was incredibly risky. Payne wasn't known for honoring agreements once he had what he wanted. An intriguing proposal, Payne admitted, lowering his revolver slightly. Though I wonder if Mr. Blackwood shares your pragmatic view. All eyes turned to Mason, whose grip on his weapon hadn't relaxed. He met Elena's gaze, reading the silent message in her eyes. Trust me. I follow Elena's lead in this, Mason said carefully. Her people have protected this water for generations. They understand its proper use better than any of us. Payne nodded thoughtfully. Very well, a provisional agreement then. You'll guide us to Soul Spring and perform this ritual. If it produces the results I seek, we'll discuss permanent arrangements for water rights. Elena inclined her head slightly. The ritual must be performed at sunrise tomorrow. We should leave immediately to reach the location by nightfall. After you, Payne gestured toward the exit, his courtesy belied by the revolver still held loosely in his hand. As they prepared to leave, Mason moved closer to Elena under the pretense of helping her gather her belongings. What are you doing? He whispered. You know he won't honor any agreement. I know, she murmured, but this gets us to Thunder Mountain where my people wait. Trust me, Mason, the Guardian is real, just not in the way Payne imagines. They rode through afternoon and into evening, a tense procession navigating increasingly rugged terrain. Payne and his men kept Mason and Elena separated, preventing any private conversation. The mining magnate himself rode alongside Elena, peppering her with questions about Soul Spring that she answered with deliberate vagueness. As twilight deepened into dusk, Thunder Mountain finally appeared before them, an imposing massif with distinctive twin peaks silhouetted against the darkening sky. Unlike the barren landscapes they'd traversed, its lower slopes showed signs of vegetation, scrub juniper and stunted pine finding purchase in sheltered ravines. We'll camp here, Payne announced, as they reached a plateau at the mountain's base. Continue at first light. His men efficiently established a perimeter, building a fire and posting guards at strategic points. Mason and Elena were kept under close watch, though not bound. Their value as guides made restraints impractical. As they sat near the fire, Mason studied the mountain looming above them. How much farther to the spring? There's a hidden valley between the twin peaks, Elena replied, loudly enough for Payne to overhear from his position across the fire. Perhaps 3 hours climb from here. Payne joined their conversation, settling himself on a camp stool with the air of a man accustomed to command. Tell me more about this guardian ritual, Miss Wolf. I prefer avoiding surprises. Elena's expression remained carefully neutral. The ritual requires sacred words passed down through my family line, a blood offering from the petitioner, proper respects paid to the ancestors who protect the water. Primitive but straightforward enough, Payne remarked dismissively. And the result? Safe passage to Soul Spring itself, access to waters that would otherwise remain hidden or become deadly to those who approach improperly. Payne smiled thinly. Water cannot choose who drinks it, Miss Wolf. Perhaps not in your world, Elena replied, but Soul Spring is different. You'll understand tomorrow. The mining magnate studied her with calculated interest. Your confidence intrigues me. I've encountered many indigenous beliefs during my adventures. Most prove to be allegorical rather than literal. The Apache don't waste words on empty legends, Mason interjected. If Elena speaks of a guardian, you'd be wise to listen. Payne's attention shifted to Mason, his expression hardening. Your continued loyalty to these people puzzles me, Blackwood. A decorated ranger turned renegade for the sake of those he once hunted. What changed? I opened my eyes, Mason replied simply. Saw the difference between justice and orders. Justice, Payne scoffed, a malleable concept shaped by whoever holds power. He leaned forward, firelight casting deep shadows across his features. Do you know what I see when I look at this territory, Blackwood? Not just land or resources. I see civilization's future. Cities where there is now dust. Farms where there is barren rock. Progress requires vision and the strength to make difficult choices. Choices like massacring innocent people at Whispering Creek? Mason asked quietly. Something dangerous flashed in Payne's eyes. Collateral damage in the march of progress. History remembers results, not methods. The dead remember, Elena said softly, and so do those left behind. Payne waved this away impatiently. Sentimentality, meaningless in the larger scheme. He rose, straightening his jacket with fastidious precision. Rest while you can. Dawn comes early, and I expect prompt guidance to our destination. As he walked away to consult with his men, Mason leaned closer to Elena, keeping his voice low. Whatever you're planning, we're running out of time. Payne won't wait for the ritual if he believes he can find Soul Spring without us. He can't, Elena replied with quiet certainty. Not without understanding what truly guards it. She glanced toward the mountain's twin peaks, now silhouetted against the star-filled sky. My people will be watching, waiting. For what? The firelight caught the determination in her eyes, for the sign that the guardian has awakened. Mason wanted to press further, but one of Payne's men approached, ordering them to separate for the night. Under close guard, they had no choice but to comply, each left to their own thoughts as darkness settled fully over the camp. Dawn broke clear and cold over Thunder Mountain, painting its rugged face with golden light. Mason woke to find the camp already active, Payne's men checking weapons and supplies, while their employer consulted maps spread on a folding table. Elena stood apart, performing what appeared to be a prayer ritual facing the rising sun. Even Payne's men kept a respectful distance, superstition overcoming skepticism in the mountain's imposing shadow. "Time to move," Payne announced, folding his maps with decisive movements. "Miss Wolfe will lead, followed by myself and 2 men. Blackwood will follow with the remaining guards." The arrangement was strategically sound, preventing any coordination between Mason and Elena while keeping both under observation. They began the ascent in single file, following a faint trail that wound upward through increasingly dense vegetation. As they climbed higher, Mason noticed subtle changes in the landscape. The plants grew more vibrant than seemed possible in this arid region. Small springs appeared occasionally beside the trail, creating miniature oases of unexpected life. Birds called from hidden perches among the rocks, sounds Mason hadn't heard elsewhere in the territory. "The mountain protects its own climate," Elena explained when Payne commented on these anomalies. "Water trapped in the rocks seeps outward, creating life where none should exist." "Precisely why Soul Spring is so valuable," Payne replied. "Imagine this fertility spread across the entire territory, under proper management, of course." Elena's expression darkened. "Soul Spring isn't meant for management. It sustains itself through balance. Take 2 Yes, yes," Payne interrupted impatiently. "Catastrophe ensues, so you've said." They continued upward in strained silence. By mid-morning, they reached a narrow pass between towering rock walls. Beyond it, the trail opened suddenly into a hidden valley nestled between Thunder Mountain's twin peaks. Mason halted in genuine awe at the sight before them. The valley was a paradise amid the desert's harshness. Lush vegetation surrounded a crystal-clear lake fed by waterfalls cascading from the heights above. Morning mist clung to the water's surface, giving the entire scene an otherworldly quality. "Soul Spring," Elena said reverently. Payne pushed forward eagerly, his usual composure slipping as he beheld the prize he'd sought for years. "Extraordinary, far more extensive than I anticipated." Elena pointed toward a distinctive formation on the valley's far side, a natural stone arch resembling a wolf's head, just as the map had shown. "The Guardian's Gate, where the ritual must be performed." They descended into the valley, following a path that skirted the lake's edge. Mason remained vigilant, scanning the surrounding slopes for any sign of Elena's people. Nothing moved among the rocks and trees, yet he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As they approached the stone arch, Elena raised her hand. "Only the petitioner may approach the Guardian. The rest must wait here." Payne frowned suspiciously. "Convenient. And if I insist we all proceed?" "Then you risk the Guardian's wrath," Elena replied simply. "Your choice." After a moment's consideration, Payne nodded to his men to remain in position. "Mr. Blackwood stays with my men as insurance of your good behavior. The rest of us will maintain a respectful distance while you perform this ritual." Elena glanced at Mason, an unspoken message passing between them. He nodded almost imperceptibly. Whatever happened, he would be ready. She approached the stone arch alone, her posture transforming from cautious prisoner to reverent priestess. From a pouch at her waist, she withdrew items Mason couldn't identify, herbs perhaps, and what appeared to be a small ceremonial knife. "What happens now?" Payne asked, watching intently from 20 yards away. "She prepares the offering," Mason replied, though he was as much in the dark as Payne. "The Guardian must be acknowledged properly." Elena knelt before the arch, arranging her items with careful precision. She began to sing, a haunting melody that carried clearly across the valley, echoing from the surrounding cliffs. The strange acoustics multiplied her pause until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. One of Payne's men shifted nervously. "Don't like this," he muttered. "Feels wrong." "Silence," Payne ordered sharply, though Mason noticed the mining magnate's hand had moved closer to his revolver. Elena's song built in intensity, the unfamiliar Apache words rising and falling like water itself. She raised the small knife, drawing it across her palm to release several drops of blood onto the ground before the arch. The effect was immediate and astonishing. The ground absorbed her blood with unnatural speed, and a low rumble emanated from deep within the earth. The lake's surface began to ripple, though no wind disturbed the valley's tranquility. "What's happening?" Payne demanded, alarm replacing his usual confidence. Before Mason could answer, a more violent tremor shook the valley floor. The stone arch began to glow with an inner light, pulsing in rhythm with Elena's continued singing. Water from the lake rose in a twisting column, defying natural law as it spiraled upward like a living thing. "My God," one of the guards whispered, crossing himself reflexively. Mason used their distraction to edge away slightly, positioning himself for whatever came next. Elena had risen to her feet, arms outstretched toward the water column, which now towered 30 feet above the lake's surface. "The Guardian awakens," she called, her voice carrying preternatural strength. "Who seeks passage to Soul Spring's heart?" Payne stepped forward, despite his visible trepidation. "I do. Alexander Payne." "Why do you come?" Elena demanded, her role as intermediary now fully embodied. "To harness the water's power," Payne replied, regaining some of his composure. "To bring progress to this territory." The water column surged higher, its movement seeming almost sentient. Elena's expression darkened. "The Guardian reads truth, not words," she warned. "Your heart seeks dominion, not balance. Soul Spring rejects those who would take without giving in return." Payne's diplomatic facade cracked. "Enough theatrics. I've humored these primitive beliefs long enough." He turned to his men. "Secure the spring. If the Apache woman resists, shoot her." The guards hesitated, clearly unnerved by the unnatural phenomena surrounding them. Taking advantage of their uncertainty, Mason made his move, drawing his concealed derringer and pressing it against the nearest guard's ribs. "Drop your weapons," he ordered quietly. "All of you." The sudden reversal froze the men momentarily, but Payne wasn't so easily deterred. "Shoot him," he commanded furiously. Before anyone could act, a war cry echoed through the valley. From concealed positions among the rocks and trees, Apache warriors appeared. 24 at least, armed and ready. Leading them was Nahele, his face painted for battle. "Ambush!" one of Payne's men shouted, raising his rifle only to have it knocked away by Mason's swift strike. Chaos erupted as the Apache closed in from all sides. Payne's men, outnumbered and surrounded, dropped their weapons after a brief resistance. Only Payne himself maintained defiance, his revolver now aimed directly at Elena. "Call them off," he demanded, "or she dies here." Mason trained his derringer on Payne's head. "Drop it, Payne. It's over." "Nothing is over," Payne snarled, desperation making him more dangerous. "I didn't come this far to be stopped by superstition and savages." The standoff teetered on disaster's edge until nature itself intervened. The water column, still rising from the lake, suddenly surged forward with impossible speed, engulfing Payne before anyone could react. For a suspended moment, the mining magnate was visible within the liquid prison, eyes wide with terror and disbelief. Then the water retreated to the lake as swiftly as it had advanced, taking Alexander Payne with it. A profound silence fell over the valley. The lake's surface settled into perfect stillness, as if nothing had disturbed it. Even the Apache warriors seemed shocked by what they had witnessed. "The Guardian has judged," Elena said solemnly, lowering her arms. Mason approached her slowly, still processing what he'd seen. "Was that? Did you know that would happen?" "Not precisely," she admitted quietly. "The legends speak of the Guardian's judgment, but its form is never the same twice." She looked toward the now placid lake. "The waters protect themselves from those who would abuse them. My song simply awakened that protection." Payne's remaining men, thoroughly shaken by their employer's fate, offered no resistance as the Apache warriors secured them. Nahele approached, clasping forearms with Elena in greeting. "You succeeded," he observed, respect evident in his voice. "Soul Spring remains protected." "For now," Elena agreed, "but others will come eventually. Then we will be ready." Nahele turned to Mason, studying him with newfound consideration. "The ranger who became an ally. My cousin spoke highly of your courage." Mason nodded in acknowledgement. "Where are the others? Burke? The children?" "Safe," Nahele assured him, "at our camp on the mountain's far side, including your wounded friend Tarak, who improves with our medicine." Relief washed through Mason. At least something had gone right in this dangerous gambit. As Nahale organized his warriors to escort Payne's men from the valley, Elena led Mason to the stone arch where she had performed her ritual. Up close, he could see ancient pictographs carved into the rock, stories of the water and its guardians stretching back countless generations. What happens now? Mason asked, the question encompassing far more than immediate plans. Elena gazed out over the tranquil valley, her expression thoughtful. Soul Spring remains protected, but Payne's disappearance will bring questions. Investigations. Burke can help with that, Mason suggested. He has enough evidence of Payne's crimes to satisfy most inquiries. The territorial governor might be a problem, but federal authorities will take interest once they learn about the child labor. Elena nodded slowly. And you, Mason Blackwood? What path does the former ranger follow now? It was the question Mason had been avoiding since their journey began, a future beyond immediate survival and redemption. For 3 years, he'd lived as a ghost, haunted by past failures. Now, unexpectedly, possibilities stretched before him. I've been running for a long time, he admitted. From Whispering Creek, from myself. Maybe it's time to stop. And do what instead? She asked, her voice softening. Mason gestured toward the valley. This place needs protection, not just from people like Payne, but from anyone who doesn't understand its importance. Someone who knows both worlds might be useful. A smile touched Elena's lips, the first genuine, unguarded smile he'd seen from her. Are you proposing to become Soul Spring's defender, Mason Blackwood? If its people would accept such service, he replied carefully. Elena's hand found his, their fingers intertwining with natural ease. I think that could be arranged. 3 months later, Mason stood on a ridge overlooking a very different valley. Below, the beginnings of a settlement took shape, not a mining camp or boomtown, but something more deliberate and harmonious with the surrounding land. Apache families had established traditional dwellings alongside more permanent structures built by settlers who'd chosen to join their community. Burke had brought several families from Redemption, people disenchanted with Payne's vision of progress at any cost, seeking a different relationship with the harsh but beautiful land. The disappearance of Alexander Payne had created the expected furor, but Burke's careful documentation of the magnate's crimes had dampened official enthusiasm for a prolonged investigation. The territorial governor, implicated in several of Payne's schemes, had resigned rather than face federal charges. Payne's company had collapsed without its driving force, its assets distributed among creditors and, through Burke's legal maneuvering, victims of his exploitation. Admiring your handiwork? Elena asked, joining Mason on the ridge. He smiled, taking her hand naturally. Our handiwork. This wouldn't exist without your vision. Below them, children from both cultures played together near a small school built through community effort. Among them was Anya, now recovered from her ordeal and finding purpose as a teacher bridging two worlds. The treaty delegation arrives tomorrow, Elena reminded him, the first official recognition of Apache rights to Thunder Mountain and surrounding lands in exchange for regulated access to some of the smaller springs. Burke thinks it will be approved in Washington, Mason noted. First of its kind, cooperative water management between tribes and territorial government. Elena leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in the closeness they'd developed since Soul Spring. A beginning, at least. They watched as Tarek emerged from a meeting lodge, walking with only a slight limp now, a permanent reminder of his wounds, but no longer debilitating. The young warrior had become an important liaison between the Apache and neighboring Navajo tribes, helping forge alliances where ancient enmities had once prevailed. Did you ever imagine this? Elena asked softly. 3 months ago, when we first met with you as my prisoner? Mason chuckled at the memory. Hardly. I was more concerned with surviving the night. And now? He turned to face her fully, his weathered face softened by emotions long suppressed. Now I'm thinking beyond survival, about building something that lasts. Elena's dark eyes held his, understanding the deeper meaning in his words. Something worth protecting. Something worth living for, Mason agreed. As sunset painted Thunder Mountain in shades of gold and crimson, they remained together on the ridge, watching over the fragile new community below, a promise of harmony between peoples and land that had seemed impossible only months before. The wind whispered through the juniper trees surrounding them, carrying the distant sound of water flowing from Soul Spring through hidden channels beneath the earth. To Mason's ears, it sounded remarkably like the contented sigh of a guardian whose waters had found worthy stewards at last. A month after the treaty signing, Mason stood beside the graves of those who had fallen at Whispering Creek. The simple mounds now properly marked with names, traditional Apache symbols etched in stone, the result of Burke's efforts and those of the survivors. I think they would be pleased, Elena said, placing a bundle of wildflowers beside her father's grave. Not because of vengeance, but because the truth is finally acknowledged. Beside them, the representative from Washington, a young man with keen eyes and reformist views, took careful notes. Payne's case had reached all the way to the White House, sparking investigations into resource exploitation on tribal lands across the West. Payne's men will stand trial next month, the official informed them. Their testimony about Whispering Creek and other operations has opened a series of new investigations. He hesitated, then added, I am authorized to inform you that the warrant for your arrest has been vacated, Mr. Blackwood. Your record has been cleared. Mason nodded, feeling neither joy nor relief, only acceptance. Legal freedom didn't erase what he had witnessed, what he had been part of. When the official departed, Elena took Mason's hand. Redemption isn't a destination, Mason, it's a journey. I'm learning that, he admitted. That afternoon at their new home on the edge of the valley, Mason finished a gift for Anya, a blackboard and chalk for her classroom. With Tarak's help, he had carved the words, two streams, one source in both English and Apache along the top. We have a visitor, Elena called from the porch. Mason stepped out, surprised to see an elderly man in preacher's attire standing there. My father, he whispered, uncertain whether he was seeing apparition or reality. Reverend Josiah Blackwood looked much older than Mason remembered, stooped, hair white as snow. But the piercing blue eyes still held the same intensity Mason recalled from childhood. Mason, the older man said, his voice roughened by age. I've heard about what happened here, about what you've done. Mason tensed, preparing for the familiar condemnation. But what his father said next stunned him. You did right, son. It took me too long to understand that, but I finally do. Father and son stood in emotional silence. 20 years of separation finally bridged by those simple words. Mason felt a final burden lift from his shoulders, not from his father's forgiveness, but from the healing of a circle now complete. As Josiah Blackwood was introduced to Elena in the new community, Mason realized that the soul of this land wasn't just water, but its remarkable ability to connect streams that seemed separate into a greater unified flow. In the evening, the community gathered to celebrate the treaty and welcome the first harvest from fields watered by Soul Spring. Under the stars, Apache and settlers sat together sharing food and stories, while children ran playing, their laughter echoing through the valley. Burke, now retired as sheriff to serve as a reconciliation judge for the region, raised his cup. To Soul Spring, he said, and to those who protect it. To those who fell so we could stand here today, Mason added. Elena stood, raising her cup. To the future, she said, her gaze drifting to the children, and to what we will build together. As Mason and Elena left the celebration, hand in hand, they paused in the moonlight, illuminating their modest home. Mason withdrew a small gift from his coat pocket, a simple ring with a sky blue stone crafted from rare minerals found in the region. I'm not sure I deserve a new beginning, he said, his voice deepening. But if you'll have me, I want to build that future with you, not just as allies. Elena looked at the offering, then into Mason's eyes. In my father's tongue, there is no word for enemy or ally, she explained, only stranger and family. And I no longer see you as a stranger, Mason Blackwood. As she slipped on the ring, wind rose from the valley, carrying the scent of wildflowers and cool water. From Soul Spring, a small column of water rose in the moonlight, as if the guardian was witnessing and blessing this union, between past and present, between two cultures, between people and the land they had chosen to protect. A new beginning, Mason whispered. And an old ending, Elena completed, pressing her forehead to his in her people's traditional gesture. In the distance, Thunder Mountain stood silhouetted against the night sky, no longer a place of conflict, but a symbol of unity. The waters of Soul Spring continued their ancient flow beneath the earth, nourishing a community that had learned the most valuable lesson of the frontier, that true strength comes not from conquest, but from harmony. As the moon rose higher, casting silver light across the valley, Mason and Elena walked toward their home, their shadows merging into one upon the land that had brought them together, a land that would now see peace between its peoples, just as peace had finally come to Mason's long-troubled heart.